fascinate that taking 2 naps a week is good for your health.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Mike Gardner. I am chair of the California Seismic Safety Commission, and we will start our meeting this morning. We're really here to listen to you and learn from you what happened in your community. Every community is different, and every earthquake or other disaster is different, and we don't pretend to know how you were affected or how things worked and what worked well and what did not work so well and how we might improve them. We're here to learn about all of those sorts of things. So we hope that those of you who are speaking will speak openly and frankly and just share your views and your experiences with us so that we can try to organize things for the future in a way that work better. And of course, we still have much work. You have much work to do here in your own communities to recover from this earthquake or series of earthquakes. If we could begin the meeting with a moment of silence in recognition of the events of the state 18 years ago and all who lost their lives on that date. Thank you. Selena, would you call the roll, please, ma'am?
Commissioner Gardner?
I am here.
Commissioner Maravelli?
Here.
Commissioner Hill? Commissioner Cooley? Commissioner Gilladucci?
Ryan Arba for Commissioner Gilladucci.
Commissioner Meneses? Commissioner Miyamoto? Commissioner Rabbit? Commissioner Strack?
Here.
Commissioner Silva?
Here.
Commissioner Swayze? Commissioner Tran?
Here.
Commissioner Clark?
Jim Hackett for representative for Ida Clare.
Commissioner Wong? Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. We were scheduled to have Mayor Pro Tem Stevens welcome us this morning. She is unable to join us, but we have Police Chief McLaughlin. So, Chief, if you would, on behalf of the city.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to pass on that the council would like to welcome each and everybody to the city of Ridgecrest, and hope that your stay is pleasant, and hope that we don't have anything that wakes you up in the middle of the night. And I hope that what you hear today is that you can provide this information to others, and that we learn today, and any future earthquakes or disasters, that we can provide information that will assist others in as a learning experience, and that will aid them in any disaster that they may have. So hopefully ours, people can learn from us. So with that, let's get started, and hopefully, do you have any questions for me before we get started?
I don't think we have questions at this point. We would hope to have some comments from you toward the end of the day as we hear what others have to say.
Great.
So thank you.
Thank
you. I will say that I have found the community to be very hospitable, even in the days immediately after the big earthquakes. A couple of us were here for a couple of days right after the earthquakes, or the bigger ones, and it was amazing how welcoming people in the city were, how willing to explain what was going on and where things had happened. As most of you know, particularly in Ridgecrest, if you drive around the city, you don't see a great deal of damage. Much of the damage was internal to buildings. You know, you see things like a mobile home off its piers or a unreinforced block wall that fell over, but really there was not a huge amount of damage to see as you drive around the city, yet there was a lot here and a lot of people were displaced and there were systems that weren't working that you wouldn't realize just to be passing through. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd also like to point out that you probably won't find a more patriotic city than Ridgecrest, and tonight there is a 9/11 memorial right behind us here at Freedom Park, so I invite you to attend, and I'll get you the time later today. So
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, is Senator Reynolds with us yet?
Tracy Reynolds with Senator Shannon Grove.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Sorry.
Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Tracy Reynolds, Constituent Services Director for Senator Shannon Grove. It has been an absolute honor to be engaged with the immediate response efforts, the aftermath recovery programs, and now the long-term plans for how to prepare and how to rebuild. Ridgecrest and Trona are undoubtedly resilient. Senator Grove, Assemblyman Fong, and Congressman McCarthy witnessed the aftermath of the first 6.4 earthquake just hours before the larger, more devastating earthquake hit. As soon as the second earthquake hit, each of these respective offices worked hard to ensure that communication between local, county, and state agencies and offices was fluid and open. Senator Grove visited the areas, met with residents on several occasions, and was able to understand all the issues that needed to be addressed, and through her office, we worked diligently to secure as many resources as possible would be available to those suffering. During the first few days following the earthquakes, we saw our neighbors, businesses, and random strangers come together to support us. We saw the incredible work being done by our first responders and law enforcement, including Ridgecrest Police Chief Jed McLaughlin, who is here with us today. And we saw the reinforcement brought in through mutual aid. Senator Grove helped sponsor an incredible community event in Ridgecrest, which boosted morale and brought all loved ones together to clear their mind and enjoy food and a movie in the midst of crisis. We were blessed for several reasons, including for the amazing law enforcement who stepped up when the community needed it most, but also because the first earthquake occurred on a holiday. When construction workers were not operating equipment, when families were together and able to immediately know if their loved ones were okay, and when there was less risk of accidents and mass hysteria. We were also blessed that this earthquake did not occur closer to a larger urban area. While it was devastating to our beautiful community, the impact which could have occurred in, say, Los Angeles or San Francisco is vastly greater. When I first arrived in Ridgecrest, I ordered and picked up 50 pizzas and took them to Trona for the people who had no food and no way to cook. On the way there, I saw a lone man on an excavator. The road was being worked on because of the damage. I figured he had been out there a while and was most likely want a hot meal, so I stopped. I waved him over and handed him a pizza. A gentle giant stood before me. As he grasped the box, I saw that he was grateful for the food because he had tears streaming down his face. He was just crying because I handed him a pizza, you know? And at that moment, I knew how bad it was for Trona, you know? We had an 82-year-old veteran, Elwood Robinson, who was brought to my attention at a veterans event that we had in Trona. And a woman, her name is Priscilla, was helping this veteran to try to get into the Barstow Veterans Home to no avail. She had called, she had tried to get a hold of them, and she was able to get a hold of them, but for some reason there was a disconnect there and was unable to get him into the Veterans Home. Now, his house was red tagged, and he was in the Kerr-McGee Center here, but a couple days later, the Kerr-McGee Center was going to shut down, you know, and we started this process during the second week of the earthquakes. The next week, the center was going to be shut down. So we were able to get Elwood, just with a phone call, we were able to get Elwood into the Veterans Home. But there was a disconnect there that we want to make sure that those connections are made the next time. We also have a couple who lives on the county line, and they're both in their 70s and 80s, who owns their home and could do nothing to change their narrative because they don't have insurance and there is no funding source to help them recover. They have a cracked foundation and are unable to hire the necessary people to fix that foundation. Those are just a few of the stories that we were able to gather together. We have many, many more. It has been incredible to witness the coming together of friends, families, and community members, and I look forward to the many conversations to come in the future. However, following these earthquakes and after the communities and emergency crews settled, it was apparent that California must be more prepared for incidents to come. That is why the September being National Preparedness Month and Shakeout Day in October are important times to share such plans and emergency preparedness tips with residents of the state. It is imperative that the conversations we are having today and the conversations they spark in the future include plans to help both urban and rural communities. I look forward to hearing the concerns and ideas brought up before the commission today. Again, thank you for having me today on behalf of Senator Shannon Grove. We look forward to the work to come to help rebuild Ridgecrest and Trona and surrounding areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Do any commission members have questions for Ms. Reynolds?
Thank you.
Seeing none. Thank you very much. Is Ms. Skidmore here for Assemblymember Fong?
She's running a few minutes late. She'll be here in just a few moments.
Okay. We'll just shuffle things a bit. Do we have Tim Dawson and Ken Hudnett? I thought I saw. Yes. Come on up, gentlemen.
So we do have some PowerPoint slides that we'd like to use.
Great. Thank you. For the audience, Mr. Dawson is with the California Geological Survey, and Mr. Hudnett is with the United States Geological Survey.
Yeah, what we would like to do is I'll give an overview on the earthquake sequence, and then Tim will follow me and talk about the surface rupture in particular. So it's a two-part thing. We'll hand
Great.
it off midway, and once we get the PowerPoint slides up, we'll go use this. Okay.
Okay. And there they are.
Oh, your slides are first. Do you mind if I just, you want to switch the order? We can try it like that.
We'll try it. Well, maybe not get the context right away, but I'm here to talk about the surface rupture of this earthquake, mostly because the California Geological Survey is responsible for producing regulatory maps under the Alquist-Priolo earthquake fault zoning map. And in fact, the city of Ridgecrest has an AP map zone through the city, which fortunately that fault, the Little Lake Fault, did not rupture during this earthquake. The reason why we produce these maps is fault rupture can cause a lot of damage to structures, different types of infrastructure. And we take each opportunity after one of these surface rupturing earthquakes to go out and study this and better characterize what the deformation is on the Earth's surface so that we can build better mitigation strategies, define additional AP zones. And so what I'll do today is I'll just go over some of the highlights of what this surface rupture did in the area. And first of all, I'd like to start out by acknowledging the over 60 earthquake geology scientists that participated in the earthquake response, mapping the surface rupture and documenting the geological effects. This was an effort led mostly by the USGS and the California Geological Survey, but we had a lot of support from the U.S. Navy, government agencies, academia, and the private sector. I'd particularly like to acknowledge the U.S. Navy, who provided a lot of logistical support, because when you're on base, we need escorts, we need UXO techs to guide us around the field so we don't injure ourselves by accident. I'd also like to acknowledge the police department of Ridgecrest, in particular Police Chief Jed McLaughlin. He provided us logistical support as well for some off-road work that we did south of town here. and California Highway Patrol. They also provided helicopter support in the days after the earthquake, and getting up in the air is one of the most important things that we do in the immediate days following the earthquake, because it helps us be able to map the earthquake surface rupture with much more precision than we would without that ability to fly up in the air. And the California National Guard, sorry. So I did my master's work in this area on the Garlock Fault, and so this area is near and dear to my heart. I've always considered the city of Ridgecrest sort of the crossroads of a couple things for geology. When people drive up in LA, they're either going to Mammoth, but they can take a turn out to Death Valley. So there's a lot of natural scenic attractions in this area. For a geologist, it's a very interesting area to study. And if you look at the screen, what we have here is the intersection of the Basin and Range Province. That's valleys and mountains, basically, where the crust is slowly being extended. And then we also have the Eastern California Shear Zone, which is basically a branch of the San Andreas Fault system. It's right lateral, so it's moving things side to side. And Ridgecrest sort of sits in the middle of that, so it's a very interesting area for geologists to study. Up on the screen, you'll see a fault activity map of the area produced by the California Geological Surveys. We've known for a very long time that there's a lot of faults in the Indian Wells Valley area. There's been earthquakes historically, most notably in the 90s and the 80s. And the third largest earthquake in California history is the Owens Valley earthquake, which ruptured to the north of here and really impacted the town of Lone Pine in 1872. So it's very seismically active. So this earthquake sequence started on July 4th with a magnitude 6.4 earthquake. This earthquake occurred on this fault that you can see going from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen on the northeast trend. It sort of started in the north and ruptured to the southwest. At the time when we were out there, we did some field recon the first day, had a lot of it understood where it was that first day. It impacted the highway as well as a PG&E pipeline and a water pipeline near the highway. Maximum displacement on this fault was about 120 centimeters. That's science units, so converted to English units, which most of us work in, that's about 4 feet of displacement in a left lateral sense. It's a somewhat complicated rupture. You can see to the north, there's two splays. One, I don't know if there's a pointer on here, so one that kind of stepped over and then ruptured to the south, crossed the highway. And the interesting thing is that south of the highway kind of splays out into what we call a horsetail, actually near the borough facility that the BLM runs. So it's kind of fitting that it's horsetailing right about there. As I said, maximum displacements were about 3 feet or so. And then toward the very end, tail end of the rupture, it distributed into multiple branches with maybe only a few centimeters of displacement, a lot of cracking. However, all those appear to be faults.
Tim, can I ask?
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm not as familiar with the map. Where would Ridgecrest be on this map?
Ridgecrest is just off this map on the sort of the left-hand part of the screen.
Okay.
Yeah. This slide just summarizes what I said about how the zone gets a little bit more complex to the southeast. So I'll just skip over that. So July 5th, we had the much larger earthquake. It was a magnitude 7.1 earthquake. My apologies to Ken. I think this is a little bit older of a slide, but had a maximum right lateral displacement of about 5.2 meters. That's about 14 or 15 feet, with maybe almost 3 feet, 2 to 3 feet of vertical displacement on that. And I'll show you some photos in just another slide or two.
Actually 17 feet.
17.
Yeah.
Got to get my units right. Again, it's a fairly complicated rupture. So in the north, it splits into many, many strands on the base, and as well as to the south, there's many, many strands. But the central part of the rupture is where most of the slip was, and it's fairly simple there. localized on a single fault zone effectively that's maybe tens or hundreds of meters wide. So a lot of the initial work was done by air to locate the fault rupture. This is a photo by my colleague Janice Hernandez, who was up in the helicopter with Ken the day after the earthquake, I believe. This is a view from about 500 feet up, and so that's about the right altitude to be able to see a lot of the details of the rupture. Again, you can see sort of the complexity of the rupture. We're on the right side of the screen. The fault's fairly simple. It's almost a single trace, but as you move from the right to the left-hand side, you can see multiple traces, and that's fairly common for a rupture like this. Weren't many surprises. What's beautiful about this, and I like Ken's analogy that he likes to use, it was like having a canvas that was ripped in half. That's what it looked like from the air. So that's what you see up on the screen is kind of a white with a line going through it that looks like a tear across the playa surface, the dry lake bed. Again, here's a photo on the ground of the same sorts of features. This is what we're interested in documenting when we go out there and look at these and map these earthquake ruptures. We want to know the width of the zone and the complexity of it, and we take this information and use it in things like fault displacement hazard analysis. So we want to characterize the width of the zone and how much displacements occurred across that zone. And this data goes into worldwide databases and basically is used in equations that predict the amount of displacement in future ruptures for any one, if there's a fault crossing for infrastructure such as a pipeline. Again, here's another photo showing the complexity of the rupture. This is a little bit more complex, but this is, again, very common for this kind of rupture. Strike slip faults typically, even though most of the displacement's localized on one fault plane, they'll have these conjugate faults that splay off. These are also of engineering significance and have to be accounted for if you're planning to avoid them, such as in the AP Act, where you have to set back a structure away from these structures, or if you're designing a pipeline or some sort of infrastructure that crosses these features. Liquefaction, not as common in this earthquake, but we did find some. Most of it's localized in these dry lake beds where there's a high water table, and that's something that we expect during an earthquake like that. On base, most of the dry lake beds had some liquefaction, and then in the Trona area, which I didn't go out to see, but the GEAR group funded by NSF, the National Science Foundation, they sent a team out there to document liquefaction effects. Another thing that occurred during this earthquake is what we call triggered slip. This is slip on other faults that are not involved with the seismogenic release of energy on the main fault. However, studying this is actually of great interest to us, mostly because it helps us identify where there are faults. Elsewhere, many of these faults were actually identified via remote imagery from satellites processed by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It's incredibly useful. They were providing this stuff in real time to us. They'd give us an image with some of their interpretations. We go out, check it, find these cracks. And so a lot of this will be wrapped into our fault mapping for the state. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ken, and we can probably just leave questions for the end. All right.
Yeah, I think it actually worked pretty well to go in the order that we're doing. So some of what Tim showed was a really nice overview of the regional tectonics, which is not included in what I'm going to tell you about. I'm just going to jump right in and talk about this earthquake sequence. So it occurs to me, you mentioned the 1872 earthquake, but of course Ridgecrest is known for earthquakes well before this sequence. Jed, you showed me that video, the ad for the Walkman, what have you. So Ridgecrest has that seismically active history. Tim mentioned about the AP Act, but I guess I just want to mention, in addition to what Tim said, I think California is the only state in the nation that has fault zone hazard. Like the Alquist Priolo is a very special thing that California has for protection of safety of the public. And in the South Napa earthquake, magnitude 6, back in August 2014, the fault rupture went through about 100 houses. And we were very fortunate in this case that the fault rupture didn't come into town. But that horsetail splay Tim talked about is about as close as it got to the residential area. And also the main site of the base, we're very fortunate the fault rupture didn't come right into town like that. So in Napa, they weren't so fortunate. And also the fault kept moving after the earthquake in what we call afterslip. So these are just some other things about what faults do. So Tim showed you the photographs from out on China Lake where the slip was very large, up to 17 feet. Just imagine if that were to happen in a future earthquake. And it's sure to happen in a future earthquake in California. So that's what we need to be ready for. And the earthquake surface rupture is of special interest in terms of the Alquist-Priolo Act and what California Geological Survey does. So, one thing I'll say as we get into it, talking about this sequence, this is a sort of a one-slide summary of some of the big numbers in terms of the number of earthquakes. This was done very soon after, so on July 16th, we had already had the large number of aftershocks from, the 6.4 had its own aftershocks, and then the 7.1 had its own aftershocks. So there are just some numbers up there that give you a summary of how many aftershocks we'd already had at that point and what to expect going forward. USGS had a new product available for this earthquake sequence. We had used it also for the Anchorage earthquake sequence end of last year, but it's called the Operational Aftershock Forecast. And so as we provided updates to that, we were getting that information through to the city and to CO Paul Dale from the Navy base and to his crew, and also down at the Navy in San Diego at the Regional Operations Center for Pacific Region Southwest. So we were mainlining updates to that aftershock forecast straight to the people that were able to then use it to do their decision making based on those numbers. And I believe it was useful. And so this was something that I think helped with, the aftershocks are really unnerving for people. And that's true of every big earthquake sequence, whether it's Loma Prieta, Northridge, in our urban areas, or here. So those of you that have been through it know what I'm talking about. It's just those frequent reminders, and it's somewhat helpful to have numbers so that you know what to expect. So here's an overview similar to what Tim showed you, but just a quick review of that. The 6.4 epicenter is shown there in the lower right red star, and it ruptured toward the southwest, as Tim said, along that fault rupture that you see going towards the city of Ridgecrest. That's the main surface rupture that we found from it. But the 6.4 also ruptured in an L-shaped pattern, like I'm doing with my hand here. And so everybody that was out here knows after the 6.4, we were looking at that seismicity map, and it looked like this. So what happened is that that left lateral rupture uncompressed this part of the main fault. And after a 34.3-hour delay, the 7.1 happened and ruptured bilaterally on the main fault. So the length of the cross fault, as we call it, the one that's oriented northeast-southwest from the 6.4, is about 17 kilometers, and the length of the main rupture in the 7.1 is about 50 kilometers. So we had seen something like this before in 1987 down in the low desert, down in the Imperial Valley, just outside of Brawley, California, on the southwestern side of the Salton Sea in the Superstition Hills. And so in that earthquake sequence, this L that I just showed you, if you flip it down like this, in that sequence, the cross fault ruptured first, left lateral, and it decompressed this part of the eventual main fault rupture. So the Elmore Ranch event was the first of the two. It was a 6.2, and it decompressed this part of the main rupture, which broke 11.4 hours later in a 6.6. So based on that prior experience of a 1-2 punch, when we were talking after Janice Hernandez and I landed from the CHP flight on the 5th of July, we came to the Navy and were asked in by Margot Allen to give a briefing to you, sir, and your EOC staff. And we talked about how that had happened in 87 and how at that time this rupture had happened and we had just gone out and reconned it. And I pointed here and I said, if we do have another bigger event because of this unclamping effect, it could be right here, it could be bigger. We don't know when that might happen. And then Jed McLaughlin, you were asking some good questions there. And then you walked me over and we briefed up the mayor at her EOC here. Similar briefing, similar questions from you, Jed. it was amazing, but that's what happened. And we were able to give some accurate forewarning in retrospect based on this historical scientific information that we had. We were able to apply those lessons learned forward to help with anticipating accurately what was to come next. So, about an hour after we broke from the mayor's EOC meeting here is when we had the immediate foreshock. We were in the Earthquake Clearinghouse meeting, Ann Rosinsky, everybody was meeting together over here in Kerr-McGee, and we all got under the tables for the foreshock, and then we continued our meeting, and then the main shock hit. So quite dramatic to go through all of that. I'm just punching through some scientific information, some slides showing you the satellite imagery analysis. This is from the one satellite image that was acquired in between the times of the July 4th and July 5th earthquakes. So you see the satellite imagery confirms what Janice Hernandez and I found on the recon flight, that the fault rupture was on that cross fault on the northeast-southwest oriented fault. And then the main shock rupture you see there on the right-hand panel on the northwest-southeast oriented fault. It's amazing how fast all of this information was coming in, and as Tim said, we were using the satellite imagery as the basis to help guide our field work and really target our missions out on the base so that we could make efficient use of our time and use of the Navy personnel that were supporting us, like Tim said, with escort and UXO support, keeping us safe out there. This is from a network of continuously operated GPS stations that is operated with National Science Foundation funding by a group called UNAVCO. They did a lot of the processing I'm going to show you on this slide. And so the static displacements, as we call it, from this earthquake, that means Tim showed you that picture of the right lateral shear across the Eastern California shear zone. That's San Andreas plate boundary motion, but it's east of the Sierra Nevada block. So that movement is going on all the time, and it loads the fault system with strain. And in between the times of earthquakes, it's just constantly like winding tension into a spring, and then the earthquake is like the spring releasing all of that energy. So as that plate tectonic strain builds up and then gets released in an earthquake, there's the fault rupture, and then away from the fault rupture, there's also this permanent deformation of the ground that we use the GPS network to record. So here you see up to a 60 centimeter displacement of the station southeast of the yellow star. That's the epicenter of the 7.1. So these are very large displacements of the ground that go along with the fault rupture. This is a little self-aggrandizing, I apologize, but that's me along with Bob Fenton, and Mark Ghilarducci was just off this photo to the left, but we gave a briefing to Vice President Pence, who you see there, and his wife Karen to the right. This is the official White House photo. So we went over to Naval Air Station Lemoore to give this briefing on Air Force 2 where they were parked, and we were able to give information to the Vice President, and we were able to answer his questions. One of his questions was to Mark Ghilarducci, "Are you getting what you need, sir?" He said, "Yes." He turned to Bob Fenton, he said, "Are you getting what you need?" He said, "Yes." But it was our opportunity to ask at the highest level for the support that the people here needed. And so I hope everyone feels that those answers were accurate. I hope people's needs are being met. But we did have that opportunity to answer his questions, and it went very well. Tim mentioned this place where we've got the 17-foot offset. So that's what it looks like. It's a very shallow, dry channel out in the playa, the dry lake bed surface. And you see on the right where that is, that yellow circle. So this is just to give you an idea, like Tim was doing, of imagine in a future earthquake, 17 feet of fault offset. What if that goes through a neighborhood? What if that goes through people's houses? We have an issue, which is that although since the AP Act was passed in the mid-70s, developments of 3 or more have had to do a setback if an active fault is found. But the issue there is the grandfathering in of development that occurred before the AP Act was passed. So you have here in California many thousands of buildings that are right on active faults, that are zoned AP active faults, and you have a lot of faults that are not zoned AP faults that could also break in future earthquakes, even if they're not AP zoned. So we have that issue in terms of seismic safety of future earthquakes with fault rupture going through people's houses. It's something to be aware of. AP was passed because of the 71 earthquake, fault rupture going through people's homes. not quite sure where to point it. I guess to back there. There we go. So we were able to do with USGS funding and also National Science Foundation funding, we were able to bring a group out here from University of Houston called the National Center for Airborne Laser Mapping, and we were able to do a large area with airborne imagery technology. This was with the permission of the Navy base. A lot of this is on the Navy base where we're working, and the imagery has been acquired. It's being processed. We're going to go through a process for permission with the Navy before public release of this data set, and we're working very closely with you, sir, and your staff to get that done in a way that's acceptable to the Navy with their operational security considerations. So that's a very important data set that will be along with the other documentation we've done of this fault rupture. Let's see. So I just want to say I think this is great to have had an opportunity. I thank you for the opportunity to describe these scientific studies of the seismicity, the GPS, that's the geodetic part, and the imagery work that we've been able to do out here. And like Tim, I want to also thank the Navy and the City of Ridgecrest, you, Jed, in particular, and also the mayor. The support out here for us to be able to do our science has been incredible. And I want to just thank you again for the opportunity to speak here.
Thank both of you for the presentation. It's interesting to get to see some of the photographs. You don't often get to see those kinds of deformation firsthand, and the photos really help people kind of understand what this really was. 17 feet of displacement is a lot, and yes, if it is under or close to a building or anything else that we have built that we depend on, it's not going to do well. So thank you very much. Are there questions from commissioners for either presenter? Ryan? No.
So regarding the aftershock probabilities, I recall after the magnitude 6.4 and before the 7.1, we had I think it was up to 9% forecast for either at a 6.4 or larger. When I've seen this run in the past, it's only at about generally 5%. It's at least my understanding that that's the rule of thumb within a certain time period following a large earthquake. Was that informed by this research that had occurred in the 1987 earthquake that you mentioned, or was there anything else?
Not. That was purely statistical based on the regional seismicity in this area, which has a tendency to be a bit swarm-like. And because of that, the statistics for this area are different than other parts of California. I would say this area with the geothermal and so forth, a lot of that swarm-like activity influences the statistics that went into that. And it's a bit more like Imperial Valley, where we also have the geothermal field, where the seismicity stats are just somewhat different. So it was a bit more elevated than what we've seen in past earthquake sequences. You're right that in general, we tend to give the rule of thumb number of 1 in 20 or 5%. But it did spike there, and so that 9% was for the upcoming week. And so that was the statistical information. So normally we don't have that additional intelligence edge that we had in this case of having the 87 sequence to draw upon and then apply looking forward. So this was, I think, a special case where we were able to provide that information because a lot of things happened right for us to be able to be positioned to give that additional forewarning. Don't ever count on us being able to do that again. I think we pulled it off in a way that was almost magical and incredibly fortunate. But then I think also, just to sort of provide a little bit more context there, because we've never had a chance before to do something like that. We didn't know how sure of ourselves to be. We were quite uncertain, so part of communicating with you all was to also communicate our uncertainty about what would happen next. We were trying to kind of embellish that 1 in 20 or 5% number, or at the time it was 9%. We were trying to provide more than just the statistics, and so it was, don't get used to that, don't count on it. But anyway, yeah, great question, thank you.
Mr. McCarthy.
No, just to follow up on Commissioner Arbor's question there for both of you. So you based that decision on a historic event that you'd seen before. Can you look at the worldwide catalog and compare on the worldwide catalog if you have something similar here and go outside of California, for example, so you can make a decision. Just kind of repeat what you did now. Hopefully I'm making myself clear to what I'm asking you.
Yeah, we did that actually in the briefings when Jed asked me about the cross-fault triggering mechanism. So, of course, Superstition Hills was on my mind. That's what I did my PhD dissertation work on. But I also referred to the 1927 Tango Japan sequence. So Jed is just as good at briefing this now as me, and he'll go on at length about this too. But also in Chalfont Valley up by Bishop, there was a sequence in the late 80s that had some similarities. And the prior activity up here in the Ridgecrest area in 95 and also an earlier sequence also involved two faults in kind of an L-shaped pattern. So it's something that we see up in this area because east of the Sierra Nevada, we get into this mixed zone where you not only have the San Andreas motion, but also the basin and range, and they're kind of commingled in through here. So you have a little bit of stretching, overprinting onto the lateral slip. And that's what we think is giving rise to this cross-fault interaction being especially strong up here, similar to down in the Imperial Valley. So the same reason why you've got geothermal in both places is also why you've got this cross-faulting stuff happening. But we do look around the world. We remain well-informed as we go along by the global earthquake research community, and we work together with them. So Tim in particular has been over to New Zealand. We've both been to Japan. So some of the earthquakes in other parts of the world do express this kind of cross-fault. Tim called it conjugate faulting. I call it orthogonal faulting, but it basically means in a map view they're perpendicular. And it's something that we're coming to understand can be an important effect where you get that unclamping, but it doesn't happen every time. So it's something where we'll continue to have that uncertainty. And another thing I want to mention is part of those briefings, how we were communicating was to say, we geologists have a saying, if it has happened, it can happen. And we do look to the global experience to draw from, but it's especially poignant and applicable when it's a historical event in California, because then it's like, okay, no question about it. We look to those historical examples like the 1872 earthquake as well and just try to learn as much as we can from that. I don't know if you maybe want to
Other questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask you tagging on to Dick's question, are there other places in California you would anticipate seeing this? I imagine Southern California would occur quite a bit. I'm not sure about Northern California as much.
Yeah, most of California has faults in it, and they're active faults. They're faults that haven't ruptured in the Holocene, but have the potential to have earthquakes in the future. And so when we see examples like that, we're going to apply it to any future earthquake sequence that starts up and take a close look. And I remember after the earthquake, and basically all the earthquake geologists and scientists looking at this after the 6.4 rupture, we did see that trend of aftershocks heading up to the northwest, and we had our eye on it, I think. I think everyone was kind of scratching their heads, wondering and worrying, because it was projecting up into the Indian Wells Valley, where there were a number of mapped faults that had the potential to produce a large earthquake. And so that's one of the things we like to do, is make sure our inventory of mapped faults are complete, so when there is an earthquake somewhere, we can kind of look regionally and think about, like, well, has this earthquake increased stress on adjoining faults that could potentially rupture, things like that, and we generate the probabilities from that.
I'll say, to respond to your question about the cross faults, we do see them. They're not quite ubiquitous, but they're quite common throughout Southern California in particular. There is one notably mapped cross fault in the Bay Area at the south end where the San Andreas, Hayward, and Calaveras join the Sargent Fault. And then others, can you think of some others that might be worth mentioning here? But the cross faulting is,
it's very common, and it occurs at all scales, which is part of the problem. Sometimes these cross faults are just not big enough to map. We don't see them until they start having a small sequence of earthquakes. One area is at the northern end of the Calaveras Fault. Historically, the Danville and Alamo, San Ramon Valley, there's been these swarms of earthquakes that occur on those cross faults. And so when those happen, the USGS usually starts looking at them pretty closely and thinking about whether they're unclamping the Calaveras or perhaps are migrating toward the Mount Diablo line thrust fault zone.
One thing I'll mention too is down at the very southern end of the San Andreas Fault at Bombay Beach, right near there. So when the 87 sequence happened and kind of showed us how these cross faults work, we also mapped one cross fault that's just northwest of that I named the extra fault. And I proposed in that 1987 paper that you could have a cross fault rupture there that could either start a big event on the southern San Andreas or could rupture the San Jacinto fault zone going from there southeast, which would go toward Naval Air Station El Centro. So down in the Salton Trough, there does seem to me maybe a bit of a relationship where these active cross faults are happening, where you also have geothermal, where there's that opening component to the plate tectonics and a little bit different stress field. So we do see more swarm-like activity. But in that case, near Bombay Beach, we've seen several swarms, 2001, 2009, and 2016, where we've had swarm activity on a cross fault. And each of those times, CPEC has met and decided not to issue any kind of a warning from the governor. The state geologist has made that decision in each of those three cases. But in each of those cases, we've also set a threshold and said if an event were to occur and take this swarm into larger magnitude territory, that close to the San Andreas, then they'd be prepared to have the governor issue a statement of some kind. But it's been a little difficult to work through in each of those cases. There have been differences in the seismicity. But what you'll see in each of those cases, if you were to review those three, is cross-fault activity, but the way it's treated is purely statistical. They don't use the cross-fault triggering mechanism in any of that consideration. So just for reflection, how do we do this? How do we take into account what's happened here in Ridgecrest? And do we want to try to apply that in forward thinking about how we're going to handle future activity on cross-faults? Do we change how we do it, which is purely statistical, or not? So the earthquake research community just had a big meeting down in Palm Springs that Tim and I came up here from this morning. So the Southern California Earthquake Center meets annually, and so the whole research community, there were 550 people or so there. Everybody is like on fire talking about this earthquake sequence. There were 65 posters shown, very rapid results being produced by a whole wide range of methods, and what we're hoping to do is distill all of that down so that it can be useful for seismic safety. So Tim and I are here like emissaries of that community to try to represent all of the great science. But this is, funded by National Science Foundation, California Geological Survey through Department of Conservation, US Geological Survey, that whole collective effort. We're doing our best to try to, distill it down into crystals of wisdom that can be used. And so maybe this is an example with what we're learning about cross-fault triggering.
Can you also speak a little bit about maybe the ground motions? My understanding is that Ridgecrest is on a relatively firm soil, caliche type of material. The naval base is actually more on a dry lake bed. Did you see any behavioral issues?
I'll give a little disclaimer. We're not seismologists, so
okay.
We study more like the geology end of the spectrum.
Okay.
We don't have a person here that could speak to really the seismology as specifically as your question is going, but I'll try. And maybe you want to jump in here too.
Can you get up to the mic?
Sorry. So in terms of that, the ground motions in bedrock tend to be sharper and less duration, and where you're out either in soft soils or playa where it's water saturated, you do tend to get amplification effects and extended duration. So there are a couple of effects. One is if there's a basin of sediment, that can be acting as a waveguide and trapping that shaking energy, and that can lead to the amplification and extended duration. Another thing that can happen is if you have some topography like a ridge, sometimes there will be a focusing of energy coming up into that ridge, so you can get a bit of a blast of ridge top extra strong shaking. So these are just a few of the amplification things that happen. And so firmer soil, that's good. I think the 6.4 rupture came towards Ridgecrest. The 7.1, fortunately, most of the energy went off both ends. So if you imagine the bow wave off of a boat, or Mach cone off of an aircraft, you get a bow wave, or you get a directivity effect. So the 6.4 directivity came right into town and into the main site at the base. The 7.1, fortunately, most of that energy went off the both ends of it and away from most people, but also partly explains why Trona got a hard hit. So anyway, that's just a real quick sketch of some of the differences there. But I think that was actually Vice President Pence's first question, was about, given the size of these earthquakes, it seemed like the damage was relatively light. And so Mark Ghilarducci responded that indeed, yeah, that's about right, that for the size of these earthquakes, given the close proximity, that it was a bit surprising that the damage wasn't worse. And I believe that's mainly credited by the earthquake engineers to the relatively recent development. Most of the construction has been within the most recent few decades here, so it was therefore to more modern codes. So this is a testament to the cycle of how the codes get improved and become more stringent through time as people learn not to build unreinforced masonry chimneys, for example. Some of the damage here was to the older buildings that had masonry chimneys. That's a classic type of damage that, you know, we keep having to learn that lesson over and over again here in California, as you well know. But when it comes to seismic safety, chimneys, you know, that's a big one. And so also liquefaction and some of these things we're quite capable of, you know, figuring out what these seismic hazards are. But then when it comes to especially the problem of stuff that's grandfathered in, it takes a lot of resolve to kind of move the needle on that kind of thing. Anything you want to add about? Question was about the shaking differences.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to the ground motion is that Ken mentioned Trona may have had higher ground motions. I haven't looked at the numbers myself, but I do know that Trona, there was a lot of liquefaction triggered in that area, and there's a lot of damage in town, partly due to the fact that there was a lot of liquefaction. Also, the construction in Trona is much older, so probably that was part of why Trona was so heavily damaged. But certainly within Trona and Argus, there were sand boils, there were lateral spreads that certainly can cause a lot of building damage.
Was there much subsidence?
I'm not really sure. I know that in the satellite imagery in Searles Lake, just in Trona, that area looks like it had a lot of liquefaction. It's what we call decorrelated on the imagery, which means it probably sloshed around a lot. Out on China Lake, where there was also liquefaction, you could actually see these very large, you know, maybe 100-yard wide circular patterns of cracking, which is in part due to the liquefaction, but also just kind of it's shaking like a bowl of Jell-O.
Yeah, in the imagery, there were some areas where the ground surface went down by quite a bit. There's the one place that some of the photos that we didn't show here, but you may have seen, include there's a place where the fault scarp is, 10, 12 feet high. It's quite a spectacular spot, and from comparing the topography of the ground before to after, that was a localized subsidence along the fault where it was coming around to turn, and it just locally dropped. So yeah, there are some examples of places where there's vertical movement, even though dominantly the lateral movement of the San Andreas system is what we saw here. There are these localized places where the ground went up in some cases, but down in other cases as the fault went through bends. We call it porpoising, where you get some of that up and down movement as well. But the dominant movement on the fault is lateral in a horizontal plane.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Just a comment on the construction and impacts in Trona. Some of the staff and I spent a couple of days here, 2 days after the 7.1, and much of that was in the Trona area. And we saw reinforced chimneys that failed. Interesting, they didn't fall to the ground, but they came apart and you could see the reinforcing steel sticking out. But in one case, 2 blocks away, there was an old stacked stone house with a stacked stone chimney that did not collapse. A few pieces fell off, but I would have expected the structure to be just a pile of rock, and it was not. So it was very interesting just to look in close proximity what was damaged and what was not, and in some cases it wasn't what you would expect to have happened.
So Fred Turner, who's here, is also an expert in this, and maybe he'll get a chance to say more later about all this, but I just also wanted to mention, I forgot to say, with the mobile homes, there was a lack of strapping. That was another cause of the damage that we did see. This is another one where we know that can be an issue, and unless there's something, I would guess say some kind of program to either incentivize that or somehow move the needle on that. That's another one like the chimneys, where it just every big earthquake we get seems like, I don't know, maybe this may be not for me to say, but Fred, I don't know if you would like to comment at this point about any other earthquake engineering issues that might occur to you, because we're talking about, why is it that the damage was relatively light?
In that particular case, that home was further up the hill on much stiffer soil, further away from the lake edge. So I think there's side effects that might help explain that particular circumstance.
Commissioner Marvelli.
Thank you. Question about the research that you're doing. Do you potentially see this, and I'm hearing you meet once a year, but I'm sure there's other conversations happening, that might potentially change the maps that are found in the International Building Code? Is that part of the conversation that you have as well?
Yeah, a lot of the research that we do, especially the stuff that is presented at the Southern California Earthquake Center, SCEC, it's very basic research, but the aim is to make it into applied research, and that's what we do at the state, is we try to take all that research and eventually apply it. And so just yesterday I had a meeting with Mark Peterson at the USGS, who's in charge of the National Seismic Hazard Maps. They produce the maps that are basically the ground motion maps, and there's a lot of conversations about how we take these new models and very cutting edge stuff and migrate the lessons learned into the building codes. And that's done through some of these ground motion maps that they produce. So they take the science that's done, very basic research, becomes applied research in these ground motion maps, and then eventually that filters into the building codes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
May I just jump in on
Please.
that question about the faulting and the mapping? With the South Napa earthquake, you may care to say more about, but the West Napa fault zone had been mapped prior to that earthquake sequence, but then you went in and did additional mapping and went through a process involving City of Napa and a public review process. So maybe as an illustrative example of what Ridgecrest might expect in the near future from your agency with regards to additional mapping.
Yeah, so our main task going forward after documenting all the earthquake effects will be to update and produce new Alquist-Priolo earthquake fault zone maps. And so much of the rupture will be zoned. My understanding right now is that most of it was outside the city of Ridgecrest, but it will affect the counties where this occurred as well. The counties for outside the municipal areas are the ones responsible for taking our AP fault zone maps and ensuring that those maps are implemented into their general plans and things like that.
You'll have public meetings.
Yeah, there'll be public hearings. We'll probably have one in Ridgecrest because that's the closest area to where these maps will be released.
Great. Other questions? Thank you very much.
If I could just give a shout out to some colleagues here. We've got Ann Rosinski, who's now with FEMA, but was former head of the California Earthquake Clearinghouse for years, and Beth Haddon from U.S. Geological Survey, also formerly with California Geological Survey. So one further thought on the fault mapping is that within the Navy base, the AP Act, I don't know, it doesn't apply, right? So
yeah, the state has no jurisdiction over federal property, but we have been working with Navy personnel and providing our information to them because they're very interested in where the faults are, where we can map faults, and using those maps to ensure that they don't put new infrastructure on top of active fault zones. So we're happy to help out wherever we can.
I'll just say, in addition on that point, is the incredible civilian-military coordination and collaboration that occurred here, just for me, illustrates how closely linked this military base is with this city and how mutually dependent they are. So a very large percentage of your employees live here in the city of Ridgecrest, and so when the base is down, it needs to get back up, and the faster that can happen, the better for the whole city. This just perfectly illustrates that mutual dependence, and so I just want to, again, say how well that worked out here, and that also shouldn't be taken as a given. If you imagine some future big urban earthquake, you know, it may not be all, you know, copacetic, and there may be some real challenges in that civilian-military arena. I believe that these senior leader seminars at the LA Fleet Week have been extraordinarily helpful, where we've been using earthquake scenarios to work with the civilian and military leadership jointly to review the Defense Support of Civil Authorities, DSCA, rule set, so as to figure out how we would all work together in case of a big urban earthquake. So that's also in play. And I believe that this earthquake sequence has really given a big heads up to the Navy in particular. And so coming up at the National Earthquake Conference 2020 in March down in San Diego, they're going to be unveiling the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute San Diego chapter's San Diego-Tijuana earthquake scenario, a 6.9 on the Rose Canyon Fault. And so the Navy is currently considering using that scenario as the basis for a large joint civilian-military exercise focused on that San Diego scenario. So this is all coming up at the National Earthquake Conference. I just wanted to get that in there about how important it's going to be to have good coordination in case of a big urban earthquake in California.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have Ms. Skidmore from Assemblymember Fong's office? Good morning. Thank you for coming.
I apologize for being tardy. I have a 1-year-old, and so it makes it impossible to be on time. Lauren Skidmore, District Director for Assemblymember Vince Fong. First of all, thank you all for coming to Kern County and Ridgecrest, for hosting your meeting, and for those of you who were able to be here shortly after the earthquakes, thank you for being engaged and helpful in all regards to what the locals were experiencing. From our perspective, we were very proud of both of our local jurisdictions, our county, and Cal OES for their engagement. Almost every question that came to us, we were able to get quickly answered and provide immediate response because of the EOCs and their engagement and their knowledge. Chief McLaughlin was a huge help in being able to disperse information to all of us in the political realm and for all of our constituents that were outside of the Ridgecrest area who don't necessarily understand the dynamics of Ridgecrest. We were able to let folks in Bakersfield, Taft, and even Tehachapi understand what was happening here. So thank you for Chief and all of his hard work. Kern County Fire Chief Witt was very helpful on the other side of the mountain in making sure the EOC was up and running quickly. Assemblymember Fong and I were able to be at the EOC during the second earthquake, and we were shocked at how quickly things were moving, how coordinated the effort was, at least from a media standpoint, on getting all the right information out to people. And from our perspective, that was the most important, is ensuring that the right information was getting out to folks and there was not concern and chaos of any additional quakes that were not warranted. When we had a meeting with Cal OES here in Ridgecrest, I was able to provide Cal OES with 2 points of concern, which was mentioned just previously. Mobile homes is a big concern for us and all throughout our district, as it is affordable housing. And so we expressed that we would like to see Cal OES make more engagement with HCD on the matter, and they ensured us that was happening. And then also we had heard of a concern with equipment from a Caltrans perspective. Caltrans was very helpful and engaged on ensuring the roads were up and running in the most timely manner. We were extremely impressed. But we do have Lake Isabella, which has a very small road, lots of rock slides. And so we had heard that the major equipment was having a difficult time getting there. Now, it got there in a very timely manner considering normal processes. But in future, just ensuring that if there is an earthquake of this capacity, that that's triggered quickly and effectively. Aside from that, again, thank you for all of you for being here, and we were very proud of all the work that came out of this, and look forward to ensuring that this provides more efficiency for hopefully not any larger earthquakes in urban areas, but if it does happen, we're very lucky.
Thank you. Are there questions for Ms. Skidmore? Thank you very much. Thank the member for us. Okay, Supervisor Gleason? Not here yet. Supervisor Lovengood, or someone from his office. Great, thank you for coming.
Good morning, Lori Marsden, Chief of Staff for the Supervisor. I would like to request about a 10-minute delay. He was able to make a last-minute change in his schedule and would like to present, and he should be here within the next 10 minutes.
Oh, great. Yeah, we'll just go on to the next one and come back.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the next one is Chief Witt. Thank you, Chief.
Good morning. Thank you for the invite. I'm David Witt, Kern County Fire Chief and Director of Emergency Services. I'll go over a synopsis of the earthquakes, our responses, and some issues brought forward in an after-action review. The first earthquake, a 6.4, hit at 10:33 on July 4th, which is historically one of the busiest days of the year for our fire departments. At 10:41, our duty officer and emergency communications center phoned the duty chief, notifying him of a large increase of 911 calls in the Ridgecrest area. Ridgecrest, Inyakern, Randsburg crews were battling a structure fire almost immediately after the earthquake, leaving no available resources to investigate approximately 40 to 50 calls. However, we ended up working in conjunction with police and Chief McLaughlin's people and a wide variety of people eventually. Pending the first 20 minutes after the earthquake, the 911 calls were mostly for hazardous condition responses, smell of gas, down power lines, broken water lines. The duty chief directed the closest resources be dispatched to assist, as well as a strike team of engines from both Kern County Fire Department, urban search and rescue teams with augmented staffing. We also requested engines from Bakersfield City Fire, another strike team from Riverside area, and the LA County Fire Urban Search and Rescue through the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. We also launched our helicopter to perform an aerial reconnaissance of the Ridgecrest area and report any significant incidents or infrastructure damage. Our duty chief contacted our Emergency Operations Center manager to confirm she was en route to open the EOC and notify other county agencies to respond. She also contacted the Army Corps of Engineers to get an update confirming there were no issues with the Lake Isabella Dam, which is currently undergoing seismic reconstruction. We also broadcast an APB through our Emergency Communications Center to advise all KCFD stations and facilities, we have 47, to move vehicles and equipment out of the stations to prevent entrapment and check all buildings for damage per our earthquake policy. Our County Emergency Operations Center was activated when our Emergency Operations Center manager, our duty chief, and Kern County CAO Ryan Aslop arrived less than 1 hour after the earthquake struck. Additional personnel from all county departments arrived to handle their individual department responsibilities. During the first 30 minutes after the earthquake, I also received phone calls from our Governor's Office of Emergency Services Region Chief and Fire and Rescue Chief Brian Marshall, who happened to be in Bakersfield and began coordinating a statewide mobilization to support our efforts. I also received phone calls offering support from other local elected leaders, including Kevin McCarthy's office, Vince Fong's office, Shannon Grove's office, all 5 supervisors within Kern County, Supervisor Gleason, who returned right when the first earthquake happened and responded to the EOC. Governor Newsom sent CAL Fire Chief Tom Porter, Office of Emergency Service Director Mr. Geological, along with the Commanding General of the California Guard to survey the area and ensure we had the resources we need. The California Mutual Aid System was working and working well. As our emergency crews arrived and began responding to the backlog of calls for service, at least initially, found little damage in structures or infrastructure. Engine companies responded to emergency calls as urban search and rescue teams established a base of operations and began a systematic search of the entire city for infrastructure damage, collapsed buildings, and entrapped people. Thankfully, there were no trapped people, only minor injuries reported to the local hospital. All emergency responses were completed, the city was searched, and the emergency activity decreased substantially. In the late afternoon, we began releasing resources from the area to return to their home bases. All was quiet overnight until the 7.0 earthquake struck around 8:30 in the evening, causing additional damage to infrastructure and increasing the nerves of all involved. We redispatched all the original resources along with some extra, believing that we could have widespread damage to buildings, given that this was a 7.0 earthquake. At the conclusion of the response for the second earthquake, we did an after-action review with most of the responding personnel as to what went well and what didn't. Fire crews in the Ridgecrest, Inuker, and Randsburg stations worked tirelessly for many hours without relief. USAR teams did a phenomenal job of gritting and searching the city quickly, twice. We were understaffed at the public information position. There's a position within ICS of the public information officers. This event had national and international interest, and information requests came faster than it could be quickly handled. County Information Officer Megan Pearson was the lead at the EOC for the county, and then Andrew was helping Chief McLaughlin here within the city of Ridgecrest. And in hindsight, we would implement probably more people to disseminate information. And one of the things that I ran across initially was, there's a huge rush for information right away. Normally we're used to dealing with fires, large-scale fires in Kern County, big fires, multiple-day fires. And so, but when we show up on scene, we can look at the hillside and we say, we've got 200 acres. It's a rapid rate of spread. I need this many engines, and I need some of them here tonight. I need some of them here tomorrow, because you can see it, and everybody standing next to you can see it and feel it, and so you know what resources to at least initially get responding. With an earthquake, especially the second one, it's dark outside and you don't know. We have, like I said, a few engine companies right here, but when you show up, along with all the policemen that are looking, going call to call, it's really hard to tell exactly what you have. And so when I receive phone calls from a wide variety of places, I have to say, I don't know. I don't know if anybody's trapped. And you can't get that information immediately. You just can't, because you don't want to go past structure fires, right? You don't want to go past somebody that truly thinks they've got a serious issue to go gather information. You want to take care of the emergency at hand. And so in a meeting not too long ago with other fire chiefs in what we would refer to as fire scope, at my level, I talked to a couple other fire chiefs, and we talked about the idea of possibly sending resources based on the size of the earthquake, rather than, hey, we have a 7.0 earthquake. We need at least this amount of equipment. Let's just get it started, rather than, there's a little gap in between with ordering the resources. And so we talked about that, and there may be, more there. But I think in going forward, I'm going to be thinking about how do I get that information and how do I get it to the right places so we can get it going, and we'll improve that information flow and go from there. We're also very understaffed in the logistical support personnel who were tasked with feeding, supplying, housing all responders, as well as providing staging, storage areas for materials and supplies. Our KCF personnel, led by Captain Mark Radican, did an excellent job under some tough conditions. And so with this, we realized that we need to add more people to help support our emergency responders that are doing a great job. Going forward, we'll use this expertise to develop our own Type 3 incident management team, which has been a goal for several years. And so we have people at a wide variety of specialists that help on teams all over the state teams, federal teams. We have the people, and we call them, but we think it would be a good idea to already have a pre-designated team with all the people that we have that can immediately come to various cities within Kern County and immediately be able to operate and have the equipment that they need. They're used to it. You know, these people that are used to going to large-scale incidents, small-scale incidents, and ramping up or ramping down based on needs. And so that was identified a need. Our Emergency Communication Center received and processed 1,601 calls for service on July 4th and 1,278 on July 5th, which was an incredible accomplishment. This success was due to the willingness of off-duty dispatchers to return to duty. And in closing, I'm grateful that we had very few injuries, no reported deaths in Kern County. I'm also grateful for the assistance given from the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, my fellow fire chiefs and police chief that sent resources to help, and I will now take any questions that you have. I was just thoroughly impressed with Chief McLaughlin and his staff, policemen that were willing to go above and beyond and help us in our endeavor too. So that was important. And I'll take questions.
Thank you, Chief. Just a quick comment. It's events like this where you really see our first responders at their very best. People just volunteer to work extra hours, and they maybe get paid, they maybe don't, but they know there is a need, and they step up and fill it. So lots of admiration for you folks. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'd just like to say thank you to our incident commanders, Denisio and Jason Schillinger, who worked with Chief McLaughlin. They did a great job too. Any other questions?
Yeah, I actually have a couple.
Okay.
I've never actually seen an emergency operation center in action. So what do you do? Could you describe it? I mean, do you come into this room and put everybody at tables, or how does that work?
So I'll talk a little bit about the county emergency operations center, and I wasn't at the Ridgecrest emergency operations center, but at the county level. So we have this incident that's happening here in Ridgecrest, and we open our county EOC to support the local EOC, and then also if we have additional incidents within Kern County, we're able to accurately be able to see what's going on at this incident, as well as, it's July 4th. We're expecting fires, and typically we get big fires. And so we're thinking, we've got this earthquake, and we could also have a fire in any second. And so we're coordinating resources. We have a big room for the county about this size, and in each spot there's specific functions that somebody would play. An information officer, a logistical support person, somebody that may be purchasing materials for the incident. There's a whole wide variety. There's over 50 positions. Now there's different levels we can staff that depending on the needs for that. We can add more positions or make it smaller, and we had quite a few people actively engaged. We have roads departments and general services and building, and it's a place where Office of Emergency Services embedded, as well as various political representatives, various people that were able to help in different ways, the Army Corps. It's a place where everybody can be in the same room and talk about what's going on throughout the county, and then focus throughout the county. And then, in Chief McLaughlin's case, it's here. It's the incident, and he'd be able to better explain here locally at Ridgecrest how that one works. But it's an effective way to, in the off times, Georgiana Armstrong, who's in charge of our EOC, she works with the city managers to do role playing, if you will. You do drills, you do, if something happens in your city, this is how we help. And we continually work together to help train, disseminate information, and go from there.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is how do you interact with the different cities and get everybody working together?
And so different cities are prepared differently. We work through her office to help. There's a city managers meeting where she'll talk to the different city managers within Kern County, the incorporated cities, and really work at it. In some areas, we feel like we're prepared, and in other areas, we need to continually work with a few cities that may not see the need. This doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, and then all of a sudden it does happen, and people might say, well, dang it, I wish I would have gone to that training, but never made it, once in a lifetime thing. So it varies.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Strack.
Thanks, Chief. I can appreciate the challenges of what I would call a rural area, and I do know I have many friends and colleagues who work for your department that were up here responding. My agency was here helping out. I just have a couple of questions, probably a little more fire service oriented, but if I could just dig down a little bit into the challenges that you saw with having or needs to provide any mutual aid that went across the county line into Trona, because San Bernardino County is woefully understaffed out that side. Granted, there's not much of a population center over there, but there is a population center. And secondarily, if you could expand a little bit on the EMS function, the side, the way the ambulances were required to work, because most of that was private companies. Did you need to move a bunch of ambulances from more population centers? Because you actually struck on something that we don't deal with in the metropolitan areas, where you can't see what's going on if something occurs at night. A lot of times we know because there's people standing on the spot, but the challenges of an event like this in a rural area, which has services to meet the services it needs on a day-to-day basis, but when you have something as big as this, and especially a large military installation right in the middle of it, which then you add on top of the possibility of the hazards that are living out here in this part of the state, the challenges are just innumerable. Obviously, we got lucky, things were done right. The response was great, but just a couple of those things, if you could just kind of expand on that.
Sure. We look back at mutual aid and on the EMS side, the emergency medical service side, we did, declare a med alert where we look at, we need additional help with ambulances. And so there were strike team of ambulances that were dispatched, which is 5. There may have been more. I'm not sure. Dean, do you know how many ambulances?
Initially, there was 5 dispatched with a medical group supervisor.
With a medical group supervisor, so somebody that could orchestrate those ambulances. And, this doesn't happen very often for Kern County, but we were able to get, quite a few extra ambulances en route and up here. And let's see, on the side of Trona, we, outside of the earthquake, at times we have sent a fire engine to Trona or various other parts outside of Kern County. But typically, we go 5 miles outside of Kern County unless extenuating circumstances. Our area of focus was definitely the Ridgecrest area. It's something that I think we need to look at, though, and I know that Trona had a hard time, and I know that, and but it's something that we could definitely should look at more in the future. When we have a wildland incident, we'll, even though it incorporates multiple cities, multiple areas geographically, we all come together and orchestrate that incident, and that would be something to look at going into the future. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, I just so the strike team ambulances, with your, I believe, do you have private contract ambulance? I'm not 100% familiar.
Yes, we have Hall ambulance service in Bakersfield, as well as Liberty out here.
Liberty's up here. Okay. Is there a way in your contract, and I'm only familiar with what we do in Riverside, very specifically, the contract with AMR down there, they actually have an ability to have surge potential. Like they have ambulances ready to go that they can staff them if they need to, and actually we could even get them if we have to. Did you have to activate anything outside of the Hall Liberty system? And if so, did that work, or is that something we're looking at? And the reason I ask is because, as you are very familiar, there's a lot of tie-ins with State EMS and the way the deployment models are going, and EOAs are contracted out with private ambulance companies. You see where I'm kind of stacking this. And my ask is, if you identified something that we could be assistance with on that side, if there was a problem, or did things work pretty well?
I think for us, Kern County Fire Department, we have a couple stations that have paramedics. We do not transport. So we go to a call, stabilize the situation, and currently we don't transport. I think the more paramedics you have, I think the better off a community is. They're able to provide advanced life support over basic life support. And so with this, the more paramedics we have within Kern County at fire stations, I think the better off we are. I think in these types of situations, it most assuredly helps. And it helps the community. It helps our people. When we get injured, it helps a wide variety. I think we could have, and I'll defer to Chief McLaughlin if he had enough ambulances here during this incident. The information that I received was that we were keeping up with the flow. However, did you see something different, Chief? Yes, and we had some issues with that. We do have some surge protection within Hall Ambulance. They have some extra ambulances that are there. And we believe, most definitely that helped. Could we have more and available? And I think yes. Anytime we have more people that are trained to the advanced life support capabilities, I think the better off we'll be and the communities will be.
Other questions for the Chief? Chief, thank you very much. I will be interested in learning a bit more about the hospital evacuation and how that went and what strain that put on the remainder of the EMS system, because typically a hospital is where you go to, not where you have to come from. But that is something we sometimes have to face. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Supervisor Lovingood has arrived. Come on up, sir.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, pardon my schedule, a little behind, and the fact that I'll have to depart for commitment this afternoon. I think the main summary of the opportunity today is to highlight what happened on the 4th and the 5th. And I think my overall, I'll kind of start with just the highlights. It was just an incredible experience. To think the first impact compared to the second was 11 times stronger. Had this been in any of our major metropolitan cities, I think the outcome and the risk and the damages and loss of life would have been significantly more. That's not to understate or devalue anything that's taken place with the constituents and citizens of both Trona and also Ridgecrest and the surrounding areas. Can't be understated. If you look at the number of aftershocks, it's a living nightmare to even consider what these folks suffered and kind of the ringling fears. San Bernardino County Fire Division immediately mobilized. And when I say that, they had folks on the ground. They had folks that were in motion from the time that it started. Our staff actually on 4th of July, Mr. Don Holland, he was on the ground. He left his house and loaded his car personally with ice and water to come up to Trona. We've been blessed with the fact of, in the 7 years that I'll soon to have served, of having strong relationships within all of our small communities. And we were able to do that. And within that, there is a creative network of outreach and communication that aided the county across the board in their response, and that can't be understated. As we look out, you'll later today hear from our EOC manager, Daniel Munoz, who was valuable and cannot be understated in what he was doing as a live, on-the-scene person in the county, of putting together all the instrumental parts, communicating with Ridgecrest, Kern County, as our lead. Our challenges right now, our local transportation authority is still providing daily transportation to the citizens from Trona to Ridgecrest. There was a Dollar General, and I know for most of it, it's not even a consideration of thought when we go to need groceries or anything. It's kind of the backbone of that community, still is red tagged. But VVTA came through in providing transportation, and there's a model that we're using as far as needles. We look to expand, and that's in a partnership with Enterprise Rent-A-Car, that you set up basically a transportation system in small communities where people qualify, and they can carpool and share and use that to really get to medical services, court services, family services, an efficient model I think worth exploring. And again, our local transportation authority brought that program together. The challenge is is to help the individuals that are left and the needs that need to be met in that community. Water infrastructure on a federal level, I think, has to be addressed. Searles Valley Mineral provides all the water to that community. They've done a great job, but they're under tremendous stress as any company that provides us with our resources for us to oversee. They're struggling to bring everything back in their operation. But when we look at that, I think there's still long-term solutions. On the state and the federal level, I think we have to examine really, truly rural communities and how we're going to react versus large metropolitan areas. The thresholds to seek and receive assistance are substantially too high to bring that value. It then turns us to our state, and our state partners have done an exceptional job all along the way. We still need to band together to reach those resources. And I can't thank my peers here from a standpoint, Supervisor Gleason, our Mayor, Peggy Brereton, our Senator Sandra Grove. Their continued outreach in our office and concern for the people can't be understated. And again, Cal OES has done a significant job. And there's always the opportunity. I think the big thing was this was on a long holiday weekend. We're doing what everybody in America's doing on a holiday weekend. We're barbecuing, we have friends, we've traveled. I was out of state, so I can testify that I was on my way back home when everything literally started to blow up. So it's a good opportunity, and I've heard you mention, I think the stress, and I could go back in San Bernardino County with our Sheriff's Department, the cross-training they did, and when the event of December 2nd struck, they were well prepared and highly communicated. We can't ever understate the need for more training between counties, between cities, between departments. Because when it does go wrong, if I happen to know you and know you well, I'm going to react completely different with a level of confidence not seen. And it's sadly to say, San Bernardino County has seen that, and we've lived it, and we know the value, so I can't. I look at even our hospitals, to know the fact that we can mobilize them in a way through airships to bring in the resources on the truly destructive opportunities. There's great value to be learned here. We're going to be conducting our after-action review. If anyone's interested, I'll share those. I think we did a great job, but I can tell you it was still just it was a living nightmare for a period of time, and for some it still is. So any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Questions for the supervisor, Mr. Strack?
Supervisor, that'll be good. Thanks so much for making the trek out here. As I came up from Riverside yesterday, I've kind of got the same question just on the EMS side, and it's more of, and I don't maybe expect you to have an answer. I know it's a very challenging issue you guys have with the exclusive operating area out here in the desert with ISMA and getting an ambulance company to have that contract and provide the services to Trona and then Red Mountain and then kind of that stretch down there to Four Corners. Is that something that you've now is kind of percolated up that there needs to be a bigger push either through the fire department with Chief Trapp or the supervisors of the CAO's office through ISMA to start figuring out a way to make sure that underserved area gets a contract provider for the ambulance service out there? And then, and if you're not aware, it's totally fine. What was the San Bernardino side of the response for the EMS moving up into Trona on that side of the county line?
Yeah, well, I mean, two things. We had a mutual aid agreement with Kern County that covered all the way down to just to really to 395 and 58, which you passed this morning. We're looking to expand those areas of services. We know that it's critical. I think to really strengthen any way we can that opportunity, Mr. Munoz will be able to address a little further. At the end of the day, the first district's 18,100 square miles. So we go from the top of the pass in San Bernardino to Mountain Pass in Nevada all the way out to Needles. We cover long stretches of interstate. I've been supportive of the fact of expanding our helicopter services to reach those. Those in public safety realize there's a critical zone to reach somebody in stress. We need to always address that. But from our mutual aid, I think it's worked well. It's never gone as when we had the opportunity to speak with the community, we're never going to get there fast enough. We're never be able to ever get the things done in the way that we want them. But every chance, an opportunity that we can afford to, I think needs to be addressed to move forward.
You said something that caught my attention, and it has to do with Office of Emergency Services. As you described training between communities and counties, does OES participate in that, and would that be a good thing to do? Because I know there's other state-related entities, such as myself, and response to schools or state buildings that might occur. We're not really part of that training, so I don't know whether or not something like that is beneficial as well. But I'll let you guys speak to that.
Sure. Well, just very briefly, the short answer is yes. There are trainings occurring all the time with OES staff working with local jurisdictions, not only in our disciplines of fire and law, but also in general emergency management, whether that's participating on a local exercise or helping either in the planning stages, et cetera. So we're usually plugged in on that. On the state level, different state agencies are involved in the through our emergency functions, where a particular state agency may have a lead, like for medical, it could be the Department of Public Health, and that goes transportation, Caltrans. And then the expectation is that each of those leads would also have an awareness and be ready when the day comes to pull in other state agencies in order to help with that response. So though there's always ways that we can do more, there is an infrastructure there to work with our local partners.
Well, I think if we can even look at the county and state and even private hospitals to encourage that type of training. The other two resources, which we reached out to one, and when I say at least in conversation, we have Fort Irwin National Training Center. They're trained. They train cycles every year nationally to go in and basically build cities and take care of crises. Same with 29 Palms Marine Corps. I think any way we can strengthen those relationships, not to overstep or to say with anything within the state. But when you look at their missions directive, they fit that role and they build cities and they bring in medical services worldwide. I think to strengthen those relationships within our communities within the state. So thanks for letting me have the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you very much, Supervisor. Did Supervisor Gleason or his office get here yet? Not yet. We'll move on then to Barbara Marichal from the Red Cross. Welcome. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Barbara Mariscal. I am a disaster program manager with the American Red Cross. I also was serving as the site director for the initial stages of this response out here in Ridgecrest. So I do want to cover some of the pros that happened for this incident. As mentioned, this did occur on July 4th. It is a holiday weekend as everyone was enjoying the holidays. Luckily on our end, what we did do is make sure at least we had a response readiness level, meaning those volunteers who were available to support in case something happens. We usually prepare for wildfires for July 4th. We did have a sheltering team available just in case for any need. Happened the earthquake, the first thing we did was dispatch that team up here once we received the official request from Kern County Human Services saying we need a shelter opening up at Kerr-McGee. We have a trailer here already pre-positioned at site at the police department, so that delay did not occur. We just had to move it over. Team was already en route, and we do have here at least 6 to 8 local Red Cross volunteers for Ridgecrest. So after we did an assessment of making sure they were okay, they were available to respond in certain capacities, one reporting to the emergency operations centers here in Ridgecrest to begin the liaison for Red Cross and seeing what is the immediate needs. So that helped in having that team workforce here, and of course connections with Chief Jed McLaughlin did help us a lot to kind of receive that information as it came about. We had our team make sure they had a safety plan in place in case another earthquake did occur, as we were already receiving residents. The 7.1 hit, and they put into effect the safety plan to ensure all clients were safe as well as the team. So that was our top priority, to make sure everyone was safe. And Kerr-McGee was a safe, sound structure. Since it is recently built, it is by code, so the only thing we saw were 1 or 2 tiles come off, so that was easily removed by the facility staff. I do want to say Jason from the facility was a great support, and his team there at the Park and Rec Center. They just dove in and helped out our team get the initial stages going and making sure that whatever we needed was there to help the clients and, of course, the operation itself. Immediately, the biggest concern that we had was, how many folks are we expecting? Due to earthquakes, residents tend to get scared of being in an enclosed structure. So we did account for the residents who were staying in their car in the lot, making sure we registered them so they know that they're always accessible to use the resources in the shelter if they choose not to stay. We had teams checking up on them as well, making sure how are they doing, any needs. And I want to say the biggest collaborative efforts that was a huge support and the highest need for residents was the spiritual care, mental health, and health services. Kern County Mental Health, the health services departments, and as well as the chaplains really united together and made sure that everyone was getting some form of service, of support, checking in on them on a daily basis, going in the shelter, sitting down with the clients, talking to them, just day to day to see what's going on, what things are needed, as well as going out to the community. So that what we call it is hotshot teams. They went out and started checking up on the communities as we knew folks were staying at their homes. Understandable, they want to make sure things are safe, no one's going in. So they were checking up, making sure they're doing okay. Through that time, I want to say by day 4 or 5, we had what we call our distribution of emergency supply teams come out. They're the ones in the response vehicles. They were making sure meals are getting delivered, water, comfort kits, which are like hygiene products, are getting to them, as well as any additional supplies, because we were seeing a huge, I guess you could say, growth of the community come together. I think that's something, I've been on disaster relief operations. I've seen it all from hurricanes to floods and wildfires. This is one of those communities that they're really tight-knit. So the care was, what do the residents need? What can we do to support? How can we also support Trona? Largest thing was water. That was the largest influx. As soon as we started to see that influx come in by day 1 and 2, we were starting to direct them, go to Trona because they need the water right away. So that's what a lot of those folks who were wanting to donate were doing. And then from there, overall, the clients began to get that information that was coming in from the police department. Again, thank you, Chief. We were getting that immediate information day by day. What's happening? What's going on? What is the number you need to call to report if you have damages to your home? As well as having the local assistance center and explaining the situation to the residents, help them understand that that all the services and anything they need to talk to of agencies will be there right next to them there at the Kerr-McGee Center. working with San Bernardino County, since we did have a large Trona population in our shelter as well, having that transit system to help the Trona residents get to the Trona Local Assistance Center and making that announcement of the times that the bus will be there for them was a huge relief for them, because they did not have to worry about tapping in financially, which was already very limited to them during that time of, now I need to worry about gas, I need to go back and forth day by day. So having that support from San Bernardino County really helped ease the frustrations for those residents as well. I think one thing we are good at looking in our damage assessment if a home is destroyed by a home fire. We can tell right away. I think one thing that we would, moving forward, would be beneficial is the collaborative, more of that sense of understanding that Red Cross really needs that support from the government agency side on the damage assessment itself, so we can move forward with the recovery phase. Without that data right away, it does delay that service. We're not the experts. We'll drive by and we'll see that a surface damage, meaning we'll see the cracks in the wall, but we're not the expert of saying, is the foundation moved? Because I wouldn't be able to tell you if I drove by. I don't know. So having that data from our partners at the government side would help that piece. That was a little delay, but we all came together on this, getting the data from Kern County, San Bernardino County, Ridgecrest, as well as the state, and then Red Cross, making sure we compiled it all to make sure it all matches up. And from that, we're able to provide that recovery services to those residents by setting up an additional service center, making sure residents know here's where you can start getting connected to the recovery needs for immediate and then eventually into the long term with the partnering agencies who will take over on the long term side. So that was our biggest piece that I think we were all learning as we went. Let's just, because we're not used to seeing that damage. So having that in the future and keeping that in mind will help the service delivery. Additionally, for when it comes to sheltering and earthquakes, we need to make sure that the building is signed off by building and safety inspector to make sure that it's safe and sound for us to go in. So having those assessments done as soon as possible, because we know residents are going to flock out of their homes to go to the one place that they feel safe. So having that assessment done by a building inspector right away to say this is a safe building to go in will help that process of setting up a shelter immediately. I do also want to say thank you to Chip at the fairgrounds. He did support us in holding a lot of our logistical supplies as well. We had huge trailers coming in just to make sure, as we didn't know what could happen next. So we wanted to pre-stage everything, and there at the fairgrounds was a huge asset to know we can safely locate all our materials there, move it. The parking lot of Parks and Recs was a huge help for us, as well as animal control from Kern County. I know pets are now families for folks, so having the pets in there and having animal control come in day by day to check how things are doing, providing a trailer for them, helped ease the clients' stay there. And just feeling at least some sense of normalcy in a shelter, which is not normal, but having that continuum did help them in that piece of day by day get through it. So for us, it's now just thinking more of how can we be prepared for the next time. From the individuals, we do offer that free preparedness training. And that's what our local team here in Ridgecrest is wanting to share and push out to our residents of take advantage of this. We'll teach you from your children to the adults and seniors of what to do individually as a preparedness plan for their household and what to have in a go bag. But as well as for our partners, let's look at the shelter sites. Let's identify those ahead of time and make sure we have that plan in place that if something like this did occur, we know building and safety, please inspect those sites right away because we know we'll get that request. So again, a huge thank you to Chief McLaughlin, the city of Ridgecrest, as well as for the park team and then Chip as well for really coming in and just the community as a whole, because that was a very impressive and moving vision just to see everyone come in together.
Great. Thank you very much. Questions for Ms. Miracle?
Yeah, I'm actually interested a little bit in your pre-established relationships with communities. I mean, how do you react so quickly? Is this pre-established?
So right now, what I've been doing is working with our local volunteers here. I've been serving this community for about 1.5 years now. And I've been coming at least to the emergency services coordinators meetings that are set here once every second Thursday, actually just in Kerr-McGee, to meet as well the other emergency managers and other agencies to just be on the same plan of like, who can do what can we do, how can we support each other, what are some thoughts for preparedness and planning. So this is a monthly meeting, and that's been helping that piece as well of knowing, okay, Chip, you can support us in logistics, supplies if something large happens. The police chief, fire chief, we all know our dispatch numbers, that if something needs to happen, you know the immediate 24-hour number to call right away. So having that continuing conversations and meetings has helped establish that official readiness. And then, of course, on our end as Red Cross, we want to be ready that way. There's not that delay. So having that team here and having a team in Antelope Valley and the shelter trailer pre-position here does help with that response because Ridgecrest is isolated. So we want to make sure that sources are here available to them as immediate as possible.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation. You mentioned at the start that it was almost fortuitous that it was a holiday weekend in the middle of the summer because of the anticipation of a potential fire. So how much longer would your response have taken if it had been January, middle of January, when it's cooler, wetter?
Still same level of response. We do have the shelter team here locally. Usually we give a 2-hour time frame in case if the shelter team is the one towing a trailer. We take into account towing a trailer. They can't come in as fast on the freeway as well as the wind that could be faced on the highway itself. So our response time is within 2 hours. Having this team here, they can set up the initial stages right away, and they're already equipped to tow the trailer out. But if we had to bring them from Antelope Valley or even Bishop, take into account that travel time might be like 2.5 to 3, but here locally, someone will be here to begin the opening process and start walking in residents.
And these are your volunteers?
Yes, these are Red Cross volunteers.
Amazing organization. I've been so impressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Gleason, by chance? Still not yet. Okay. He may not be able to make it today, depending on what's going on. But our next scheduled speaker is Ann Rosinski from FEMA, and I know you're here. Good to see you again. Thank you.
So I also would like to express our appreciation for this opportunity to talk to everyone today. I do want to start with one small quick correction to something that Ken said earlier. It's true, I was the chair of the California Earthquake Clearinghouse for 9 years, and it's something I'm still very passionate about. But for Ridgecrest, my colleague Cindy Pridmore was the lead, and I do want to make sure that she gets the credit for that because when I took over the clearinghouse, I had a couple of years to get a feel for the organization and get up to speed. Cindy didn't have that, and she is a trooper. She did a fantastic job, and I just want to make sure that she gets the credit for that. So FEMA's participation in supporting this event, the FEMA Watch Office tracks earthquakes from magnitude 4.5 and larger, so we're always paying attention to earthquakes, whether they're offshore or onshore throughout the region. So when these events happened, we were paying attention. And during the initial phases, our response officer was coordinating with Cal OES. And then when the larger event happened on July 5th, we did activate more fully, and we had some teams up at the State Operations Center. I was up there. We were working very closely with the Cal OES Earthquake and Tsunami team, Ryan's team. I do want to give a great shout out to Kevin Miller, Sherry Blankenheim, Yvette LeDuc, and Dominique de Great Ward. I had a number of residents from Ridgecrest and Trona contacting me even through last week. I've had over a dozen people call me directly asking about whether or not there's going to be federal assistance. So I made sure to coordinate those with the state so that the state can document that, and that can go toward, if there is a further declaration. In the days following, the governor requested assistance, and there was a federal emergency declaration which allows the federal government to provide support for emergency services. And I understand that Governor Gavin Newsom also did submit a request for a federal disaster declaration. At this date, there's no word on whether or not the president is going to sign that, so I don't have any updates on that, but that may still happen. I don't have any additional information on that. In terms of what some of the activities were that we were involved in, as I say, we were up at the State Operations Center, and then during the following week, FEMA teams, FEMA personnel accompanied the OES teams during the public assistance and individual assistance damage assessments. And one interesting little phenomena, as Tim Dawson noted, most of the damage was on the naval base, which does not count toward the state declaration. However, because the naval base has a civilian population and they have kids, there are schools out there. So one interesting little wrinkle with this was that although the land is owned by the federal government, the state division of the state architect is the permitting authority and owns the schools out there. So we did go out and look at the schools and document there was some significant damage that was included in the damage assessment. So that was captured. Let's see. I also want to, Chief Witt, your comments were tremendously valuable. Your insight about coordinating resources based on the magnitude of the event. That's really important. I'm going to be sure to share that with our response team because unlike other no or near no notice drills, a 9-county area is not going to spontaneously and simultaneously combust. But with an earthquake, we know that you can have devastation over a wide area instantaneously, and that's very different. So we need to be thinking about our response capabilities and how we should be changing the way we think about those things. So I'm very interested in your after-action report. If you have one, I'd really like to see that and share it with my colleagues. There was a discussion of information and training for schools. I do want to make sure everybody's aware tomorrow there will be a free webinar available on earthquakes and FEMA P1000, Safer, Stronger, Smarter, a Guide to Improving School Natural Hazard Safety. That's going to be a free webinar tomorrow, and that's aimed at school administrators, teachers, parents, anybody. It's to educate people about earthquakes and natural hazard safety with schools, because their schools are often shelters, so that's a great resource. There are a number of FEMA publications, technical guidance on earthquakes and construction that are also available. And we also had a FEMA building science team come out in the weeks afterwards to take a look, and they made some observations. They may be providing some additional guidance and advisories that came out of the observations from this event as well. And one other interesting little phenomena about these earthquakes, there's a holiday connection. I don't know if anybody else mentioned, but the 1984 Northridge earthquake was on Martin Luther King Day. The 2010 El Mayor Cucapaw earthquake was on Easter, and now we have the 2019 Ridgecrest earthquake on July 4th. So maybe holidays aren't the best time for earthquakes. But that was about it for FEMA. We are, again, interested in hearing what we can do better, how we can improve, how we can collaborate and coordinate more effectively with the state and locals. And I thank you for your time.
Great. Questions for Ms. Rosinsky? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're about to move into a public comment period. I don't know if everybody has a copy of our agenda. We are looking at a lunch break from shortly after 1 to about 2:30. So if you can last that long, you can hear public comment. If we have public comment that runs into the scheduled lunch period, we will stay here and listen to you. That's why we're here, is to listen to you, so we're not going to cut anybody short. In public comment, I would ask that if somebody has already said what you would like to say, if you can sort of say, me too, or I experienced the same thing, or I have the same concern, rather than take up several minutes saying what the person before you just said, that will move us all along a little bit better. So with that, we have, I think, cards in the back, speaker cards. I've not had any turned in. If you would like to speak, if you could fill out one of the speaker cards for us, that helps us keep the minutes better. And I'll just call people in the order that cards are turned in. And if somebody is ready to speak now and you don't have a card, if you just fill it out after you speak and get it up here to our staff, then we'll have that information. So is there anybody who would like to address the commission? I'm not seeing people thundering to the front of the room. I mean, seriously, we are here to listen to your concerns, your observations. We would be interested in knowing where you think things went really well, where you think they didn't go as well, and in that case, how they could be improved. So if you have something to say, please do feel free to share it with us. We would like to hear. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Renee West-Lusk, and I live within Ridgecrest city limits. I have two concerns. One was the people in Trona were without water for quite a few days, and they suffered hugely because I spoke with a few people from Trona, and I was just wondering if there could be another response for a rural community like that in the future to evacuate the people. I was wondering if that would be a possibility, because they suffered many days without resources. I don't know how they lived through it, some of the people. My second concern is, Ridgecrest and Trona and this whole area is dependent on our hospital, and basically we really didn't have a functioning hospital for 72 hours. And that's a concern to me, too. I don't know if there's something that could be done to address that in a rural community, because it's not like we're in an urban area where there'd be other hospitals that might still be functioning if your local hospital's not able to function. Those are my two biggest concerns.
Great. Thank you very much for both of those. As I mentioned earlier, some of the staff and I were in Trona, I think on the 7th and the 8th, if I remember. And it was kind of remarkable how, at least from outward appearances, there was not a great deal of help there at the time. We saw it coming in on our second day. Saw trailers with big semi-trailers with pallets of water, but we didn't see that the first day we were there. And they did organize transportation pretty quickly to get people from Trona up to the evacuation center here in Ridgecrest, but many people don't want to go. You want to stay closer to your house because that's everything you've got. And if you feel reasonably safe, you'll suffer quite a bit to stay and guard your things. Another thing that we saw in Trona, and I expect it happened in Ridgecrest as well, was the faith community came together, and they identified members of each of their congregations who had needs, who maybe didn't have transportation or didn't have the ability to come get groceries. It was mentioned the Family Dollar store is the grocery store in Trona, and it was closed, still closed, I believe. So just getting basic supplies was a challenge. And the faith community was very helpful with that, and different churches put together volunteers that would talk to other members of the congregation, say, you need this, you need that, you need the other thing, and they'd go get them for them and bring it back or take them to the resource they needed. And that's, I think, a good thing about our society is that we do look out for each other. And in a situation like that, we have organizations, sometimes sort of unexpected ones, that come together and help step in, because realistically, government's not going to rescue us all the time, especially in the earlier hours of a big event like this turned out to be. So, anyone else like to speak? Okay. Did we hear anything from Supervisor Gleason? Do we expect him at this point, or do we know? Okay. Well, we'll just hold the spot, and if he is able to join us, we'll put him in. I guess we'll just go on with things that are scheduled after the lunch break for now. And the agenda says I have more comments. I think I've said most of what I need to say, but again, I want to thank all of you for coming today. There are some important things this afternoon that I want to understand more about, and a question that was touched on sort of peripherally is the ability of a nearby military base to assist a civilian population. And I do not know what the impact on the medical facilities at China Lake might have been in this instance, but potentially there is an ability for all large military installations have a medical facility, and potentially that could become available for emergency assistance to nearby civilian population. It's not a normal sort of thing, and here China Lake is not a regular military installation. They do things that aren't done other places, and as a result, they have higher security needs than, say, March Air Reserve Base, which is close to me in Riverside. So there are security differences, but that is potentially an opportunity that I think we should all be thinking about and looking at whether if the Ridgecrest Hospital had been really significantly damaged and was out of service for 6 weeks, not 3 days, what would we have done? How would we have dealt with that? And what is the best way to deal with that? So those are things for us to be thinking about. Overall, I was impressed with the response on this earthquake or series of earthquakes. As usual, people worked together, took care of each other, checked on neighbors, did all the right things. Our emergency responders, I think, did just a fantastic job, and particularly given the relatively small size of our emergency departments and the distance to supporting resources, I think things went just incredibly well. Another thing that impressed me was how quickly the highway between Ridgecrest and Trona was repaired, both after the initial earthquake on July 1st, which was right away, seemed like, and it was very quick for the more significant damage over a broader area of the highway from the larger quake on July 5th. So the people who were involved in that, I think, did just a really outstanding job. And if you look at the geography and the road network here, that's really important to people in Trona and Searles Valley, because there is no other convenient way to get in and out to any substantial sized facility. You can go north, but it's a long way to anywhere. And if you can get back to, I think it's Trona Road that goes back to Highway 385, but that was this side of the surface rupture across the highway. So Trona was truly isolated. Getting that road back passable was important. I thought they did a really excellent job. Yeah, it's actually, we haven't, any of us had a break. Do you want to just move lunch break up? Okay. Yeah.
I mean, we can, if we stay here, we can also be available to have one-on-one conversations.
Yes. Yeah.
Chat the next one.
I don't know if our presenters for the afternoon session are here yet. They aren't really scheduled until 2:40. So, great. Do you want to go earlier? Come on up. Thank you. Then we will take a longer break, and commission members, commission staff will be available to sit and talk with people, answer questions. And we'll probably have a few for you.
Good morning. I'm Don Sadiba, General Manager, Indian Wells Valley Water District. And I appreciate you being here and the opportunity to share our experience with you. I think the most important thing that you should get from our experience is that we experienced a course of 5.4, a 6.4, and a 7.1 magnitude seismic events within 2 days, and our water supply system essentially remained intact. Our customers did not lose service. And I think that's remarkable given the three seismic events that occurred. I don't know too many water agencies that could continue to provide service to their customers. And that's not to say that the customers didn't have problems on their side. We had water supply lines to evaporative coolers, to water heaters. Still to this day, you find people that don't secure their hot water heaters, and those supply lines ruptured. So our staff was busy responding throughout both events to calls to shut off the water service to their houses. We did have some commercial damage, fire suppression systems in a couple of our local businesses, one of our schools, a couple of apartment buildings. But again, that was on their side. It's not to say that we didn't have any damage. We did have, as a result of the earthquakes, we have 10 production wells. 4 of those wells exceed the maximum contaminant level for arsenic, so we have 2 arsenic treatment facilities. One of those facilities had an instrumentation problem. It wasn't a problem with the wells, but with the treatment facility itself, so the 2 wells were not available. We had electrical problems at one other well, and then one other well, the pump, it just didn't pump. The pump stopped working. So we were down to 6 wells. If this had happened probably 7 or 8 years ago, we would have had a different outcome. Because of the drought and mandatory conservation measures, we've seen a 30% decrease in our pumping. So we were down to 6 wells available. Typically, during the summer, 5 or 6 wells meet our customers' demand. 7 or 8 years ago, it would have been 8 or 9 wells. So we would have had a little bit different outcome if it wasn't for the drought and the conservation measures that we've implemented. So we have had some damage. I want to mention FEMA and Cal OES were out here immediately. We spent 2 days with them going through the system, identifying potential damage. We had structural damage at one of our block buildings, which is yellow tagged. We had a booster station that has some damage. But I want to point out one of the reasons that we were able to get through this relatively unscathed was redundancy. We have redundancy in our booster pumps. Obviously, with our well system, we have redundancy in our wells. We have 16.5 million gallons of storage capacity in our tanks. We did have one leaking tank. 2 of our tanks the sections are bolted together. The rest of them are welded. One of those older bolted tanks developed a leak, and we haven't quite determined the extent of the damage to the tanks. I don't think there's much. In fact, as we speak today and yesterday, we've got divers in our tanks doing assessments. The tanks were inspected in January, and we haven't seen a problem, but we felt it was prudent to bring them back and take a look post-earthquake to see if there, in fact, was any damage. So we haven't got the reports. We have filed an application to OES for damages, much of which we don't know the dollar amount yet. We've turned in the application of documents without dollar amounts. We're still getting assessments. We had structural engineers out here looking at our buildings and at our bolted tanks. So again, we don't know the damage there, but again, I think we came through relatively well. I will say our crews were kept busy. Literally, after the first one and mostly after the second one, our call center would get a call. Literally, as soon as the guys came back into the shop, we'd send them right back out again to shut off our customer service. So there was damage on the customer side. As far as mutual aid, I want to point out almost immediately after the 6.4, I received a message from the general manager of Palmdale Water District saying, what do you need? Can I help? We didn't end up needing his help, but it was much appreciated that he would reach out in that manner and say, we're here to help. Let us know what you need. Conversely, and you've heard about the water situation in Trona, after the 6.4, there were power outages in different parts of town, and Searles Valley Minerals lost power to their well system. We didn't. I did receive a call. They have a storage tank east of town, which you probably saw on your visit here, that the tank level got very low. And of course, the community was needing water, so we got a call after the 6.4 saying, can you give us water? We have emergency interties with both the Navy and with Searles Valley Minerals. We test those every year, go through the procedures because we have turnover, and we want to make sure that people that are new understand how to operate those interties. So we did get a request from Trona saying, can you send us some water? Our wells are down. And we were in the process of doing so when we got a call back and said, power's back up, our wells are on, we don't need the water. The issues they had were not with water supply necessarily with their wells, but with the pipelines. I was manager of mining over there for 29 years, so I was familiar with the system. They had at one point over 140 breaks on their water system, and it was to the point where they were prioritizing leaks. If it was a minor leak, they were letting it leak just to be able to get water to the community. So you've been told, and you're aware of the struggles that they experienced. But on our side, as I said, we were very fortunate. I want to point out, the fact that my board has been very supportive over the years in making sure that we have system redundancy, making sure that we have financial reserves. And that's an important thing to point out that, we've applied for some reimbursement from OES. And of course, they reimburse at 75%, but you need to front that money to make those repairs. And we're fortunate that we have a reserve policy in place and financial reserves to enable us to make these repairs and then go ahead and seek reimbursement. So the biggest damage that we had, as I said, we lost the pumping equipment in one well. The well itself is okay. That's since been replaced. The one leaking tank, the structural damage to one of the booster pumps, and minor damage to a mason block building. Other than that, most of the damage was very minor and has been since repaired. So again, we came through quite well. We did have a debrief among our staff to say, what did we do right? What could we do better? We brainstormed several things with communications. I will mention one takeaway here. Social media was really important. We do have a Facebook page, and when we were in a position where we had 4 wells unavailable, of course it's summer, and here in the desert, evaporative cooling is the primary method of cooling, which uses water. So between landscape irrigation and evaporative cooler use, our water production spikes during these summer months. So we were down to 6 wells, which should be able to meet our customers' demands, but we, as a precaution, put out a Facebook message, said, here's our situation, we're down 4 wells, here are some things you could do to help us during this time when we're trying to get things back to normal. Things like if you have dual cooling, air conditioning, and evaporative cooling, consider running your air conditioner. Most people don't like to do that because the electrical bills go significantly higher. But that was the suggestion. Monitor your landscape irrigation. Be aware. Don't overwater your landscaping. Don't drain pools and refill pools during this time. We had over 20,000 views, and our customers did respond. So we were able to get through that. Like I said, we weren't necessarily in trouble. We were kind of on the edge there with those 6 wells, but we made it through, and we found Facebook to be a very good tool. It's a double-edged sword sometimes. You can get people on there that just voice their opinion, and they're not very well informed. But for the most part, it was positive, and we got a good response. So I did want to point that out.
It's great. Thank you. I have 2 questions. One is that the electrical system performed pretty well. Power came back pretty quickly after all of the events. But do you have very much backup generation capacity to run your pumps if you had to?
We do. We have generators at all of our well sites.
Great.
And they're tested and maintained, and so we're in a good position there.
Just out of curiosity, how many days worth of fuel do you have on site?
Oh, that's a good question.
I don't want to pin you down too tightly, but is it a little bit, or is it?
It's significant to run probably 3, 4, 5 days.
Okay. And hopefully in that time you could replenish fuel if you needed to.
Sure.
The reason I asked is many of the cell towers that have generators have a 24-hour supply of fuel. And if they run out of fuel, the tower doesn't work anymore. So that can be an issue. You've got a generator, but if you can't run it, it's a big hunk of metal.
With regards to fuel, one thing that we learned, we've since implemented a procedure where we don't leave without making sure all our vehicles have full fuel tanks, because during the earthquakes, some of the vehicles were down to a quarter of a tank, and some of the gas stations in town weren't open. We have an agreement with some of the local stations to provide fuel to us, but if they're not open, obviously we're not going to get the fuel. So we've since put agreement in with the city that in an emergency they have fuel tanks here, and that they would make fuel available to us, but hopefully we don't need it because we've implemented the policy of don't leave without making sure that your fuel tank's full.
Good policy.
That's one of the takeaways.
The other question was, I understood from a prior discussion with Chief McLaughlin that there were some issues with the sanitary sewer and treatment facilities. Has that created any concern for possible contamination of your wells, or are they sufficiently separated that
they're sufficiently separated? The treatment facility is out on the base, and I think the city operates the sewer treatment. The water district does not.
Yep, right.
Right.
So, okay, great. Thank you. Other questions?
Thank you very much. Could you clarify for me how many water districts are actually in this area that you would consider within the earthquake zone?
How many wells?
How many districts? Because it sounds like the district that serves Trona and the district that you manage have some interesting differences.
The Indian Wells Valley Water District just serves, our service area is Ridgecrest, but we extend just over the San Bernardino County line into a rural area, just a small area. Searles Valley Minerals, their well system is in Indian Wells Valley, and Searles Valley is responsible for producing the water, but once it gets over to Trona, the Searles Domestic Water Company distributes it to the customers.
So, as usual, it's a patchwork quilt of the water systems, like it is in many parts of California.
Yeah, I know Searles Valley isn't here, but again, I was there 29 years as manager of mining and responsible for the water, and I can speak to the system that goes across the Navy base, predates the Navy base, and it's just a whole mishmash of different pipe sizes and piping materials. And so during the earthquake, as I said, you had rigid asbestos concrete transite pipe, which is very rigid, so when the earth moved, the couplings would snap or they'd be weakened. And so, as I said at one point, and it may have changed, but I was in contact with the operations, the lake operations superintendent during the first few weeks, and he had said, they had 140 some breaks and counting. And we did get a request at one point after I think it was after the 7.1, for mutual aid, if we could send people over to help repair the leaks. Our employees had put in a lot of overtime, and I was a little bit reluctant because we weren't sure. After the 6.4 and 7.1, we're thinking, okay, what else is going to happen? And we didn't want to be sending people 25, 30 miles away and have something happen here. But we did have a couple of employees that hadn't put in quite as many hours, and we talked to them, and they said, yeah, we'll go over. So we were prepared to send them over. Again, we got a call back, and they said, well, Searles Domestic Water and Company employees, their system's down anyway, so they're going to help us, and they had plenty of help. So, but we were prepared to, again, provide mutual aid. As you've heard, this is a remote area. We have to help each other. So if we can help them, we're more than happy to do that. I know they would do the same for us. So.
Great. Other questions? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I guess this maybe could be under public comments. I'm not on the agenda for this remark, but I did want to just mention something that this presentation just brought up in my mind, and that is the safety of your divers that are in your tank inspecting in case of an aftershock. So it occurred to me that since we have Larry Collins here who does urban search and rescue, we've talked over the years about possibly having a special implementation of the Shake Alert Earthquake Early Warning System that the state of California has invested in along with U.S. Geological Survey through Cal OES, and that state support has been absolutely essential to building out the Shake Alert Earthquake Early Warning System, as you know. But it would take some special additional work to make Shake Alert work for first responders. But I was just talking to Larry and Jed for their thoughts on how either people in harm's way in a damaged building who are trying to get survivors out, how they could benefit from having Shake Alert on site where they're working. So this could be really a big deal if we could do it. And Larry, he helped me organize a meeting years ago to go over this, and we just couldn't get the funding and couldn't get it prioritized at the time. So this has not been done yet. There was a special implementation of early warning in the case of Loma Prieta and the Cypress structure. So once you have an earthquake main shock and then you're getting the aftershocks, you can put in a specialized local network around where all that aftershock activity is happening, and then do a specialized direct line radio broadcast to where your people are in harm's way trying to help. It's just something that occurred to me based on your divers. If there's an aftershock while they're in there, it just triggered that thought. So I just wanted to take a few minutes here, but also to hopefully prompt Larry and Jed if you have some additional remarks on that.
It's a good idea. Thank you. If you do, please come on up.
Ken fired me up on that one. So no, he's correct. We have been discussing this over the years, and some of it comes from experiences, back in my previous career with LA County Fire Department and being on duty when North Ridgequake happened, being on duty at the Whittier quake, having been deployed to the earthquakes in Haiti and the Himalayas at Nepal and the Japan tsunami earthquake and some others, and studying it and in our experiences and training, we know that you're going to have personnel in, like Ken mentioned, in harm's way, doing search and rescue operations post-quake, and it may not be the aftershocks. It may be that may have been a foreshock followed by the main shock in some cases, as we just saw. So for the personnel in harm's way and structures that are damaged and other vulnerable spots, having just a few seconds of warning would be really good. In the Northridge quake, when the rescue of Salvador Pena was happening in the Northridge Fashion Center parking structure that took 9 hours, there was no such thing as earthquake early warning in those days. The firefighter is operating 2 levels below the top deck, trying to free that street sweeper driver, they just knew they weren't going to be able to get out of there in time anyway, and their fallback was to create a safe zone that they could dive into, that they had reinforced down 2 levels below, and that was their plan, and they did that throughout the day as the aftershocks occurred. But it's true that having a few seconds of warning could allow personnel to step out of the way, get out of harm's way, or at least get in a safer area, and that includes everybody responding to an event like that, and in the days and weeks beyond, as you have still a higher level of risk locally.
Yeah. Even building inspectors inside checking buildings post-earthquake. So.
Yeah, and earthquake early warning, we know, I mean, that's going to be saving lives left and right when it's fully built out. So everything from at a fire station where personnel are operating, cleaning underneath a fire truck, for example, which they do every morning. The Selmar quake, when that occurred in 71, there's still rubber marks on the wall of that apparatus room this high, where the fire truck was bouncing this high during that Selmar quake, and they've left it there. They paint around that mark just to remind themselves that, hey, it's not business as usual when the ground starts shaking like that. So we're fully in support of Ken's idea to be able to set up a more localized system, network, post-quake for the emergency operations to pursue.
Good idea. Thank you. Do we, by chance, have yet either Michael Winters, the city engineer for Ridgecrest, or a representative from PG&E in the room? Are you willing to go ahead? Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning. Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity to come and be a part of this and share our experiences and some of our after-action reviews that we've had since the incident. When the 6.4 earthquake hit, our immediate notification was we have 2 compressor stations, one in Topak and one in Hinckley, that compress the high-pressure natural gas that feeds this area. And we had a complete vibration shutdown of those stations, which completely blows those stations flat. So we are connected with the USGS, and we have our own geosciences department, so we get alerts within seconds after we have a triggered event. For us, that's anything over 4.5, and we start doing damage assessments. We start looking at SCADA and remote monitoring equipment at our control room, looking for increases in flow or loss of pressure. And we have those monitoring stations not only in our compressor stations, but we have them intermittently along our transmission pipelines, as well as multiple locations throughout the towns that are hooked to the distribution stations, where we reduce pressure to distribution pressure, which is just right at the edge of town here. Immediately at our control room, we did not see any losses of pressure or flow increases. So we did visual inspections of our 2 compressor stations, because if we don't get those started back up, we don't just lose Trona, we lose pretty much half of California. So we did those inspections. We did get those stations back up and running in a pretty short order, and immediately deployed our ground survey crews to survey all of the transmission pipelines between those stations and Trona, which is the dead end of that particular pipeline. We did not find any damage. However, we did discover immediately a fissure that ran across line 311, which is the one that feeds this town. So we did ask our geosciences team to come and start doing displacement and stress calculations on the pipeline. And at that location, initially, we observed about an 18 inches of lateral movement across the pipeline. So we knew that we had stress there, so we began doing modeling to make sure, hey, is this thing safe to remain in operation? And those calculations said that, yes, we were good to maintain operation. However, in a normal circumstance, when we have potential damaged pipeline, we'll take pressure reductions as a safeguard. But in this case, because of lateral stress on the pipeline, the fear was if we reduced pressure, we would lose some of the rigidity in the pipeline and possibly cause more movement. So we maintained our pressure as it was. It was deemed safe. So along with that, we received shake maps and damage assessments from our geosciences department with information that they get from state and federal, like USGS. We get very closely tied with the information that comes from there, and they start doing damage assessment valuations, and they provide us with damage zones that need to be inspected. So originally, with the 6.4, the damaged area that we needed to immediately assess was fairly small, around 1,000 service locations that we needed to look at. Later on, as everybody knows, on the 5th, we had a second 7.1, and that dramatically changed our damage assessment area to the entire distribution and transmission system that feeds Trona and Ridgecrest, so a complete evaluation. So at that point, we knew that we needed to get more boots on the ground. We were initially operating out of our service center on China Lake, and the second earthquake, we had to evacuate that building because it sustained structural damage. The ceilings all fell down in there. Fortunately, we do have mobile command centers that were deployed, and we were able to still operate out of that yard, just not within the building. So we deployed 23 surveyors. We surveyed 50 miles of transmission line on a daily basis over 10 days to validate any additional movements. Aftershocks were not creating more damage or opening up additional fissures that need to be evaluated. 13,399 services. We surveyed 1,195,186 feet of distribution main twice. We surveyed everything 2 times. We surveyed 6,000 feet of 10-inch house line at Valley Mineral as a courtesy to the customer to make sure their facility was good to start back up kind of towards the end of the event when they were getting ready. I think they were getting to the point where they were going to get water. So we helped them out with that. Through these evaluations on the distribution system, we found a total of 366 leaks, and all were repaired before we left the area. We deployed construction crews that repaired all of those leaks. And we also deployed heavy construction crews for the gas transmission lines. Once we evaluated the necessary repairs, we had to replace 2 600-foot sections of pipe on those 2 transmission mains because the damaged areas, plus knowing the damage that we had to those pipelines, we wanted to increase the wall thickness of the pipe in those areas for future damage prevention and incident prevention. So we did go out, and there's multiple regulation stations between our compressor stations and here. Each one is vital to the supply of gas to these areas, so those all had to be evaluated. We did have some earth movement, and a few of those, they had to be excavated, evaluated for damage, and resupported. We did not have to shut any of those down, the integrity maintained, so very good outcome there. To be able to perform the clearances on these 2 lines, we needed to be able to pull them both out of service at the same time, which means we had to bring in gas to feed the city of Ridgecrest as well as the city of Trona. Otherwise, we would have to take them out of service, and it would have just made a bad situation a lot worse with them not having gas for, they obviously didn't need heat, but cooking and other things that they use gas for. Just to give you some stats on what we supplied during that time, we supplied 2,737 million square cubic feet of compressed gas between Trona and Ridgecrest, and we also supplied 29,272 gallons of injectable liquid natural gas, and that was specifically to the town of Ridgecrest. And the customer days, if you go by the number of customers times the number of days that we provide that gas, it's about 75,400 customer days of gas that we supplied. That was important to us that we maintained service to the towns as we did this construction work. We were able to take it out of service, replace the pipeline, and get everything back into service and complete those clearances in 48 hours. Our geosciences department, we use them a lot. They do a lot of things for us. Lately, what we usually use them for is mudslide prediction in burn areas and debris flows during heavy rain time that would affect our assets. And I'll have to say our geosciences department, in conjunction with CGS and USGS, was a vital resource for us to have during this event. Without their insight and ability to predict damage areas, this would have taken twice as long. When we have other types of emergencies, it's fairly easy to determine, like in a fire or a dig-in or something like that, it's pretty easy to determine what your damage is. But on an earthquake, it's a complete unknown. You have no idea where to start. You just got to go after everything, right? And with this data, we're able to go after those areas that were determined to be highest risk. Because obviously, if you've got gas leaking, you've got a public hazard that could be an exponential catastrophic event if something ignites, particularly in an earthquake, when there's other damages to other facilities. So very vital, those teams that do the geoscience work for us and for the state and feds. So very, very powerful information that we get from them. So I guess I acted as the director of field operations for the Emergency Operations Center here in town. I was, I guess you want to call it the one throat to choke for all of the events and all of the boots we had on the ground here. So if anything went wrong, I was the guy. I'm very happy with our response to this event. I'm very happy with the help of the first responders, the one team approach that everyone took, the ability to reach out to local fire and police for support when we needed it, their ability to reach out to us when they needed it. However, the one thing I want to point out, everything that I just read through, there has been some ongoing relights and stuff like that for people that have been let back into their houses, but everything that I just mentioned was accomplished in 12 days. So pretty amazing, great effort. However, like with any event, there's always room for improvement. So we did complete our after-action review not too long ago, and we did highlight a few items that we feel like we need to improve on if this happens again. So one of the things that we feel like we could have improved is we should have embedded our local OEC in with the city's Emergency Operations Center for Joint Command sooner than we did. I think it was a couple of days before everybody got their feet on the ground, and we actually embedded a PIO into that group. So I think there was an opportunity for us to get involved in that sooner, day one. So we did take that down as a area of opportunity for us. Another area of opportunity is as technology changes, our ability to assess damage greatly improves. And we do have technology available to us that we actually currently own these assets for area patrol and LiDAR flights. We have the equipment, we own the airplanes, and we need to actually add those to our earthquake response procedure. It was something that I had asked for, but not until 2 days after the event when we're still trying to do damage assessments. Our geosciences team asked for that support. We did get it. However, we probably should have had those aircraft in the air same day, because the data that we collect, along with the data that USGS and others collect collaboratively, can help everyone. So we need to improve in that area. We have those aircraft ready to go. We should have made that call sooner. So we should have tied our PIO in with the City Information Center. I think there were some failings that we had around. We could have communicated a little bit better on emergency actions that the public could have taken. And I think embedding a PIO in the City Information Center would have given us access and knowledge of the local social media that everyone else was using to get communication out to the community. So we did have discussions. We've added that into our emergency response manual for that local emergency center and information center embedment, so that we can give everyone that comes in all the information they need for everything that they're suffering through immediately, instead of waiting for a town hall to provide some information, which we did, but I think we could have done that sooner. So a couple other things that I've initiated as part of just some afterthoughts of myself in this event. We do have an R&D department that's currently working on drone-based leak detection, and I want to start testing that in a non-disaster scenario, so that we can have a procedure in place where we can actually use this untested drone technology for damage assessments within city limits. Obviously, being close to an Air Force base, there are also FAA rules that need to be followed when flying those drones, and we do have to work through some privacy issues, particularly when we have to fly over someone's property. But the technology is there, we're testing it, and we do have legalities to work through. But I think it would be an incredible tool to come in here with 40 drones and be able to cover an area in a single day rather than multiple days to do the damage assessments, particularly with large-scale leaks that we can't get to. So that's kind of our assessment, some of the things that we did. Overall, watching from the bleachers at the response of the cities and counties and first responders, I have to commend the response that I saw, just because these earthquakes are extremely hectic. I was involved in the Napa earthquake, and it didn't go quite as well. Maybe we learned a lot from that, but I think the response from the local first responders and the government agencies was pretty incredible. So I just wanted to give some kudos there. So any questions for PG&E?
Excuse me. Thank you very much. Did you, excuse me, did you experience much in the way of customers shutting off their gas at the meter who didn't need to?
Yeah, we did. However, I don't really think there's anything wrong with that personally, especially if it's an unknown. If you don't know if you have a leak, if you have a broken pipe in your house and you're unaware, the effects of that can be pretty catastrophic. Yes. So we do tell people, hey, if you experience a natural disaster emergency, that is one of our protocols to call 911 and turn your gas off. And we do give guidance on that. On our website, you can actually find information on how to turn your gas service off in emergency, and some recommendations around tool availability that you would need to be able to do that, how to store it, where to keep it, strapped to your riser, and some other things like that. So it does create a lot of additional work for us, but I would rather I'd rather go around, do safety checks, and turn on gas than what the alternative could be.
Yeah. No, it absolutely does make sense, but
yep.
Particularly if you get a lot of them, most customers probably are not able, or at least shouldn't, turn their gas back on and relight pilot lights.
Yep.
And it can be some time before, if the damage is widespread enough, or the issue is widespread enough, maybe some time before somebody gets their gas back on. So it's always something of a judgment call. And I've seen instances where people have been without natural gas on their property for as much as 2 weeks, when in fact they didn't have any damage. They just couldn't get it turned back on because the gas company, in that case it was that gas company to the south, not you, they just didn't have the personnel. They had to bring in personnel from all over their service area, and it took that long to get them there and get the services back on.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And, I think that was one of the things why we decided that one of our shortcomings was actually embedment into the community information centers, because we could have easily provided that information. We could have, at a better pace, gotten the information out on the social media on exactly what they needed to do. When you're an employee here, you think, oh, PG&E 5000, everybody knows that number if they need something, but in reality they don't. I think for us in this scale of emergency, we have the ability and the manpower to pretty much turn anyone on within 24 hours. And we will do safety assessments on their house lines and stuff like that, and do flow tests to make sure they don't have something leaking, and we'll do the pilot lights as well. I just think not getting that information out immediately could have caused some of the confusion.
Good lesson. Thank you. Other
definitely.
questions?
Thank you very much. I'm curious. Your name isn't representative. Could you introduce yourself and what your role within PG&E is?
Yes, I apologize. My name is Eric Kurtz, and I am the Director of Gas Operations for Construction, Leak Survey, and Corrosion Abatement for Southern California. So I'm San Joaquin County line to Arizona border. And in emergency situations, I'm usually in the GEC, which is ran out of our control room in Bishop Ranch. However, in a case like this, we need a director of operations on the ground to be able to make decisions. And for the South, I'm that guy.
So you're in gas operations. So that explains why you didn't talk about anything happening on the electric side of the house.
Yeah, that, and we don't service this area.
Okay, and that's the clarification.
Electric here is Southern California Edison.
Yeah, SoCal Edison.
Thank you. Couldn't remember where the territory lines are. In terms of customers, you've talked about it peripherally, but initially you did not include in that 12 days worth of work actually checking customer lines proactively. You were waiting for calls from customers.
No, we did leak surveys on everything. If the gas was still on at that facility, we did a safety check as a precaution. But as the event transgresses, there are certain things that we need to do. And if a customer calls and needs gas, we will make it a priority. However, damage assessment is our primary focus.
And then another comment that you made was that 2 natural gas compressor stations, Topac and Hinckley, and it was something to if there had been damage to these, half of California would have lost its gas. Now, can you elaborate on that and tell me what the backup plan would have been if one or both of them had been damaged?
So if one or both of them had been damaged, we could shut in those stations and bring stations online to the north and pull gas out of Ruby from Northern California. So we do have a backup plan, but in an earthquake situation, getting those facilities back online is primary, and those are secondary actions.
Thank you.
Other questions? If not, thank you very much, sir.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Think we will take a lunch break at this point, and we'll reconvene. Do you want to try to do 1 o'clock? I think we can do 1. we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. And so thank you all for coming, and there'll be more good stuff this afternoon.